$1 Million Date, Do-Over Date Series, Book 1. By Susan Hatler. Chapter 1. I sped down the country road on my way back to downtown Sacramento with so many emotions rolling through me I couldn't decide which one stood out the most. Despair? Hurt? Anger? Pain? Frustration? A deep and underlying rage against the injustice in the world? Each raw emotion bounced through me as if I were sampling them like flavors of ice cream. Only, less enjoyable. And, how could I, Abigail Apple, settle on just one flavor of ice cream? When life dished out a smorgasbord of feelings, I felt them deep in every corner of my being. Not fun this evening. Definitely not fun. Since I couldn't curl up into a ball while driving, I took my frustrations out on the accelerator of my car, pressing my foot harder against the pedal. I blinked through hot tears as the speedometer climbed. When you think with your heart, the way I do, you tend to feel emotions big time. I swiped under my eyes, sniffled and then glanced over at my dog, Banana, who stared at me from his spot in my purse on the passenger seat. The questions in those big brown eyes made me wonder whether I needed a kiss for comfort or a ferocious attack dog to protect my heart. The image of the latter option brought a smile to my face. Banana was a Chihuahua Dachshund mix and couldn't scare a butterfly. The day had been going beautifully until 15 minutes ago. The sun was shining, which was par for the course in Sacramento, but still. I had a date scheduled for tonight with a guy I'd been exchanging flirtatious emails with ever since he reached out to the pet store I managed for information about dog adoption. Although I hadn't seen him in person yet, I could tell from his kindness and humor that he had a sweet smile. And the best part of my day? 20 minutes ago, I'd been playing with puppies. That's right, puppies. You're going to be late for your big date if you don't leave soon, Reagan had said as she picked up a puppy that had been sunbathing by the water bowl beside the barn. I scratched the tummy of a puppy and watched Banana chasing another puppy through the softly swaying grass. Who needs a hug from a man when you have the kisses of 8 puppies? I asked, grinning at Reagan. She laughed. Well, if you're staying and ditching your date, then I'll grab the pooper scooper and you can get to work earning those kisses. Man, would you look at the time? I popped to my feet, making a half-hearted attempt to remove some of the dog hair from my blue sundress, which I knew would be pointless. I needed to hurry home and change before my date, not pick up puppy litter. Sorry, gotta go. That's what I thought. Reagan shook her head before shooing away the puppy that attempted to climb into the water bowl. Goofy pup. I really am running tight on time, otherwise I'd stay and help, I said, and then called to Banana as Reagan walked me to my car. I gestured to the rolling hills, the groves of tall trees and the bright blue sky above the red barn. You know how much I love it here. Your dog rescue is the most perfect place to ever exist. Reagan lived in a small house on the property and ran the dog rescue at the barn, out of the barn, providing dogs with the best life possible until they were adopted. Our friendship began when I drove out to the barn one fateful day and found true love in the biggest eyes of the tiniest dog with the largest heart. I got 2 for 1 with Banana and Reagan, which was the best deal of my life. Any spare moment I had between hanging with my girlfriends and managing the pet store, I drove south from the city to spend time at the dog rescue. I helped Reagan feed, clean, and play with the dogs. The volunteer work was a source of pure happiness in my life, and it helped give the dogs the second chance they wouldn't have without Reagan and her selfless work. So all of this made what Reagan said next very shocking. Well, enjoy it here while you can, because it doesn't look like the shelter will be around for much longer, she said. My heart stopped and I paused beside my car. What did you say? I asked, sure I'd heard her incorrectly. She sighed and ran her fingers through her short red locks, lifting her head up to stare at the perfect dome of bright blue sky. Reagan? I asked, reaching out to touch her arm. What's going on? Her gaze met mine, and that's when I noticed how sad she looked in her eyes, the sadness in the slump of her shoulders, and the sadness in the way she chewed her bottom lip. Oh. This was not good. It will probably be fine. I mean, it will have to be fine. Somehow, she nodded toward my car. You should get going or you'll be late for your mystery hunky man. Try not to worry about me and just have a good time. I know you've been looking forward to this date. Without thinking, I tossed my keys as far as I could hurl them into the tall grass lining the gravel road that led out of Reagan's place. Abigail, she exclaimed. Oops, I said, feigning sheepishness. I guess you might as well tell me what's wrong while you help me find my keys. Was it the smartest idea ever to throw the keys to my only means of transportation into a tangle of weeds and grass? Probably not. Was it a bit painful sifting through the thorns of the wildflowers dotted along the road? Most certainly. I knew if we ever found my keys and I somehow managed to make it to my date, he'd probably run away in a flash thinking I had the chicken pox or measles from all of the little pricks on my hands. In a nutshell, was my action a tad rash? No way. I was Abigail Apple, so it was a whole lot rash. But the gesture had worked. After Reagan finished lecturing me about common sense and practicality and not being so stubborn, she finally revealed the bad news: Reagan's landlord was not renewing her lease. For the average person with a lease, that news would be a bummer. It would mean spending hours online looking for a new place, rolling the dice with new roommates, and blowing through a paycheck buying friends pizza and beer to lure them into helping you move all of your stuff. But for Reagan, the news was a complete and total disaster. There weren't any other rentals like this, so having to move meant that the dog rescue would likely shut down. It meant that the dogs she takes care of would have to go to the pound. It meant that this ray of sunshine dog shelter that was good and wonderful and kind was ending. No, I wasn't being dramatic. The news was devastating. How can your landlord do that to you? I asked. She lifted her shoulder. The land value out here is skyrocketing with all the recent development, and my landlord needs to cash in. I can't blame him. He's been generous keeping my rent low for so long because he knew of the good I was doing here. You're far too understanding, I grumbled, parting some grass and finding nothing more than dirt and wildflowers. We're all on this earth together, which means your landlord has a responsibility to each of these dogs, too. For Hansel and Gretel and Tiny and Fido and Nemo and... Found them! Reagan exclaimed, interrupting my speech and then dismissing my suggestion that we storm to the landlord's house and demand justice. We headed back to my car and she kept the keys in her pocket, probably fearing I might hurl them again if she didn't agree to one of my plans. I raised my finger high in the air. We could bring the dogs to his lawn and refuse to leave until he renews your lease at the same price. It's a brilliant plan. He'll have to cave. No, Abigail. It won't work. He has 2 kids going to college in the fall and needs to sell. Oh, fine, if you're going to be all rational about it. I blew out a breath, racking my brain for another viable option. We could find you an apartment in town with a rooftop terrace and then secretly keep the dogs up there. That won't work, Abigail. We could rob a bank? I asked, even though I knew that was a long shot. I didn't own a cat burglar suit, and an orange jumpsuit would not be a good look on me. Yeah, we'd be fabulous at bank robbery. You're many wonderful things, but stealthy you are not. Plus, you know, the whole immoral aspect. She turned to me when we arrived at my car. Now, I'm going to give you your keys, she said, but pulled back her hand when I reached for them. Not so fast. First, you have to promise you won't use them to drive to a bank to rob it. Do banks even keep much cash in the vault anymore? I rolled my eyes. You know I'm not going to rob a bank. She narrowed her eyes. I want to hear you promise. Fine, I promise, I said, giving her a big hug while she insisted we'd find a legal way to save the dog rescue. I promised to brainstorm for a solution. Then I loaded Banana into the car, jumped into the driver's seat and sped off before she could see me start to cry. I didn't start speeding because I was covered in dog hair and dirt and needed to rush home to clean up for my blind date. No, I was speeding because I was upset and sad and angry and frustrated and so many other emotions that I finally decided I didn't need to settle on just one. I'd just take all of this emotion out on my accelerator, which felt so good. The plan worked fine until red and blue lights flashed in my rearview mirror. No! Ugh. I pressed a palm to my forehead, realizing the cop wanted me to pull over. Me, who hadn't had a ticket since I was 16 and made a right turn on a red light after stopping first, when apparently there was a small sign saying I wasn't supposed to do that between 4 and 6 p.m. How was I supposed to know that dinky sign was there? I mean, could they have made it any smaller? Not likely. A siren blared from behind me in a high-pitched squeal, making me jump in my seat. Then a deep male voice rang out from a speaker instructing me to pull over. I rolled my eyes. Have a little patience, dude. I just saw the lights, so give me a second to pull over. Seriously ridiculous. I pulled my car to the gravelly side of the road, turned off the ignition and then sagged against the back of my seat. I wanted to mope, but what good would that do me ticket-wise? That would be Zippo. So, I forced myself to perk up as the police car pulled to a stop behind me. Then I switched into "I'm so sorry, officer, please, pretty please don't give me a ticket" mode. As the police officer got out of his car, I wiped away the mascara tears until my hazel eyes were basically makeup-free and then dabbed on some pink lipstick. Hey, couldn't hurt. I used my fingers as combs to smooth down my silky dark hair until I heard a knock on the passenger side window. What was he doing way over there and not at my window? Okay. Rolling down the passenger window, I pushed away my gut-wrenching heartache, my overwhelming sense of despair and the oppressive images of homeless puppies that threatened to bring fresh tears. I forced a sweet, beaming, "Don't give me a ticket" smile. Good day, officer. License and registration, ma'am, the officer said. His lack of friendly threw me off my game. But I was Abigail Apple and my cheeriness was unstoppable. So, I leaned toward the passenger window, gazed up at the officer, opened my mouth and then promptly forgot the cutesy line I had prepared. Oh, wowzers. The cop was hot. This had to be the officer who had defined the saying about a man looking good in a uniform. He was tall with a broad chest and a fitted navy blue uniform that was pressed and pristine. His blue eyes rivaled the sky above and his dirty blonde hair was combed back, with not a single hair astray. Strong jaw, sharp nose, tanned skin. Yes, this police officer was handsome. Very handsome. The only way he'd look better was if he could crack even the tiniest smile in that iceberg stare he was giving me. I mean, really, dude. This was an A+ smile I was giving him. Again, license and registration please. He held out his hand and I immediately reached out and put my hand in his. Tingles wafted up my arm and suddenly a movie scene played in my mind of this hot cop sweeping me out of my seat and driving me off into the sunset in his police car while REO Speedwagon's "Can't Fight This" feeling wailed from the radio speakers. License and registration, please, he repeated, jerking me out of my daydream. I blinked and stared at my hand that lay awkwardly in his. Why wasn't he squeezing my hand back? And then it hit me. Oh, no. This guy wasn't fulfilling his role in my romantic comedy fantasy by giving me his hand. No, not at all. He just wanted me to hand him my information. And I didn't mean my digits. Oh, embarrassment. My cheeks heated and I pulled my hand away. Sorry, my mistake. You probably get that all the time, I said, laughing a little too loudly. I stopped mid-giggle when I saw that the officer was not chuckling along with me. Not even a hint of a smile actually. Oh, so awkward. Not a good start to Operation Get Out of Ticket. Look, officer. I waited for him to give me his name, but instead he listed a string of numbers. My eyebrows came together. Was that your phone number? My badge number, ma'am. Okay, did he have to call me ma'am? I mean, really. I was only 26 years old and he didn't look much older than me. My smile wavered. Get it together, Abigail. I drummed my fingers against the window ledge and squinted up at the officer. Well, Mr. Just your license and registration, ma'am. I bristled in frustration. The guy was like an impenetrable wall. Was I going a little fast or something? If so, it wasn't on purpose. I'm an excellent driver. 15 miles per hour over the speed limit, ma'am. I let out a breath, deciding to try a different tactic. I'm so sorry about going a little over the speed limit. I got distracted by my cutie pie dog for a second and didn't mean to go so fast. I grabbed Banana from my purse and lifted him up for the officer to see. I knew using Banana to get out of a ticket was a low move, but I was desperate. No one could resist those big, imploring eyes and bite-sized paws and eagerly wagging tail. It was humanly impossible. License and registration, please, he said, and it was then that I discovered this police officer was not in fact human because he ducked his head past Banana so he could stare at me. Are you admitting that in addition to speeding you were driving distracted, ma'am? I wiggled Banana up at him one more time. I mean, maybe he just had really poor eyesight. What else could explain the banana magic failing? Finally, I pulled Banana back inside the car and grabbed my wallet from my purse. Look, officer. Is there any way you can give me a pass this one time? It's been a rough day and I would take it as a sign that there is still good in the world if you could just let it slide. The law is the law, ma'am. Yes, but you're the one who decides how to enforce it, I countered. You could show a bit of mercy and understanding. You see, my friend just told me she's going to have to shut down her dog rescue and all of those poor dogs will be without a home, which breaks my age. License and registration, ma'am, the officer repeated like the soulless robot he clearly was. Or, I'll have to ask you to get out of the car. For some reason I suspected it wasn't so he could twirl me around, dip me low, and whisper he could never give a ticket to someone as beautiful as me. But, by some unknown inner strength I managed to keep up my smile as I fished my license out of my wallet. The name Abigail Adams stared back at me and I chastised myself for not getting that updated legally after I changed my name. After all, Abigail Adams was the woman I'd promised never to be again, the woman who thinks only with her head and is a passionless, unhappy lawyer from Harvard. Now, I was Abigail Apple. Vibrant, fun, and passionate about puppy safety. But, you know, the DMV is such a pain with their long lines and it smells like a dusty warehouse in there. So, for a little bit longer Abigail Adams lived on my driver's license. I handed the license and car registration over to the inhuman police officer and then slumped over my steering wheel as he walked back to his car. I glanced over at Banana, who wagged his tail. I can't imagine the type of girl who would even consider a date with that guy. I shook my head even as I found myself checking out the officer's backside as he walked away. Not me, that's for sure. I need someone with passion and emotion. Like my date tonight. Oh, no. My date. I checked the clock on the dash and realized I'd barely have time to swing by my place to drop Banana off with my bestie Hannah, who was currently living on my couch while looking for a more permanent place to live, before hurrying, within the speed limit, to the boathouse in Old Sacramento for dinner. And even then I would probably be late. What a great first impression I was going to make, dirty from working outside all afternoon, covered in dog hair, makeup a mess from crying, and frazzled from Reagan's bad news and RoboCop's ticket. I glared at the officer as he returned my license and registration, 2 words I knew would haunt my dreams tonight, and, of course, gave me a ticket. Maybe he was secretly also Reagan's heartless landlord. It wouldn't shock me. Pay the ticket at the address printed there or contest it in court on the stated date, he said, tipping his head at me. Drive safe now. You have a great day, too, I said, watching him leave without another word. I considered giving the ticket to Banana. Does my dog ate my ticket work any better than my dog ate my homework? Sigh. I drove back into town and quickly dropped Banana off with Hannah at my place before hitting the road again, comforting myself by imagining my sweet date finding some reason to make me feel better about this awful day. Based on the emails we'd exchanged, I knew he'd understand. He'd agree with me that the handsome officer, no, the not handsome officer was heartless. He would pat my hand and tell me that giving me a ticket when I was under such distress was totally ridiculous. He would be sympathetic and kind and order me a piece of chocolate cake to console me. I parked in Old Sacramento and rushed into the restaurant, pausing by the mirror in the lobby to rub away some mascara from under my eyes and to dust off some dog hair, assuring myself it would all be fine because I'd never have to see that police officer ever again. I strode up to the podium, gave the hostess my name and the name of my date, and then she led me toward a table by the back window with a view of the river. My heart pounded with excitement at the man already seated at the table, the sweet man I'd been emailing and would finally get to meet in person. But when I got a better look at my date, my feet stopped moving forward and my eyes bulged. Sitting at the table was the hot cop who had given me a ticket, somehow looking perfectly put together in a clean, pressed suit, and still without a hair out of place. As I stood there gaping at him, he turned his head and his gaze met mine. He paused as he took me in and then ever so slowly the corners of his mouth lifted. Chapter 2. As I stood in the restaurant with my mouth hanging open, I stared at the soulless robot who had given me a ticket about 20 minutes ago. My emotions fired up as I pondered if this guy seriously had the nerve to be smiling at me right now. Lips curved upward. Eyes dancing. Yep, he was definitely smiling at me. So infuriating. Maybe RoboCop got a kick out of seeing me again after his obvious triumph with his little ticket book. Or maybe he found humor in how disheveled I looked thanks to his taking up all of my time so I couldn't shower, or use a lint remover, before my date. Whatever. Not like I was going to wait here and ask for his reasoning. I obviously had the wrong table. I whirled around, accidentally knocking the menu out of the hostess's hand and sending it flying in the air before it hit the floor with a thump. Oops. Sorry. I'm having a bad day. Such a bad day. It can only get better though, right? I asked, picking up the menu and handing it to the hostess. Can we go another way to my table, please? Her forehead wrinkled. Your table is right here. I tilted my head. Where exactly? Right there. She nodded toward the table where the smug officer was sitting, and smiling. No. No. I shook my head, knowing this couldn't be possible. My wonderful date that I'd been looking forward to for a week could definitely not be with the heartless cop. Fate would not be that cruel to me 3 times in one day. So, I checked out the table next to him. A group of 6 men wearing suits sat there having a discussion that, in my opinion, looked painfully dull. Next to them, a table with a family of 4 who were arguing over a dinner roll. Nope, Not my date either. I stretched up onto my tiptoes to see if there was a table behind RoboCop, but there was only a window overlooking the river and Tower Bridge, illuminated in the waning light as dusk fell. I don't see my date, I whispered to the hostess, hoping the cop couldn't hear. Right there. Dirty blonde hair. Blue eyes. Muscles. Her voice trailed off and she gave him an appreciative look as if she wanted him to be her date. The really cute guy. No way, I said, shaking my head. That can't be my date. Why not? She asked, stepping closer to me. He's good looking and he was really sweet when he came in. He's a robot, I said, stating the sad fact. The hostess started to laugh and then stopped short when I didn't join in. Oh, you're not kidding. Well, he said his name is Cooper Hill, which is who you said you're meeting. And he said he's meeting a woman named Abigail Apple, which is your name. Right? For a moment, I considered pulling out my license to show her I was technically Abigail Adams and then making a run for it. But then a thought hit me, the cop hadn't known I was Abigail Apple when he gave me the ticket. We'd only ever communicated through email, so he didn't know what I looked like. He thought I was some random stranger, which was still a bit rigid. But at least if he'd known he'd pulled me over, then surely he wouldn't have written that ticket. I'd go clear things up with him and then we might be able to still share a nice evening together. Hopefully something good could come out of this train wreck of a day. The hostess led me the short distance to the table and the officer kept his gaze on me as his eyebrows rose. Then he scanned the room and did a double take when I stopped at the table. Enjoy your dinner, the hostess said in a giddy voice. Thanks, I said, trying to keep my cool as I sat down. The hostess left the menu, giving another glance at the cop. I shook my head, surprised she hadn't high-fived me before walking away. Finally, I turned to my date and smiled. Hi, Cooper. Abigail Apple? He asked. Yes, that's me, I said, holding my palms up. Don't worry. I understand what must have happened earlier on the road. I paused for a moment, waiting for what would surely be a heartfelt apology from him. When he stayed silent, I shrugged. You didn't know it was me you'd pulled over, right? That's because I haven't gotten around to updating my license yet. So, you saw the name Abigail Adams instead of my new name Abigail Apple and had no way to put the connection together. My new name has a long story behind it about an apple tree and a quarter-life crisis and wanting a change and... I realized I was rambling and stopped, feeling my cheeks warm. Anyway, the point is I'm sure you would have cut me some slack if you'd known it was me you'd pulled over. There's no way you would have given me that ticket if you'd realized who I was and that we were going on a date, this date, later tonight. Right? He just stared at me as I sipped my water. Poor thing, he must feel terrible. Look, please, don't feel bad, I insisted, holding up my hand. It's really not your fault. It was just a misunderstanding. Don't feel bad at all. I don't feel bad. He gave me a side glance and a slow smile, shaking his head. Finally, he tapped his fingers against the menu. To be honest, if I knew who you were then I still would have given you a ticket. I laughed big time. See, there was that sense of humor I was so attracted to in the emails we'd exchanged before deciding to schedule this date. Everything wasn't so terrible after all. He was so funny and loved to joke around. Ha ha ha. Abigail, I'm serious, he said, taking a deep breath. I feel obligated to be honest about that fact. I would never want to lie. My jaw dropped for the second time in less than 10 minutes and I leaned forward. But I was barely speeding and I'd just received bad news and I'm your date. He leaned forward, too. And you broke the law. I blew out a breath. Barely. Barely over the speed limit is still over. My eyes widened. Over is over? Are you saying you would have given me a ticket even if I'd only been going 1 mile per hour over the speed limit? You weren't going 1 over, he said, his voice calm. But... Good evening, the waiter said, appearing beside the table with a bottle of wine. I'm Javier and I'll be serving you tonight. The gentleman said this is the lady's favorite. I glanced at the bottle of Chardonnay that bore the label of my favorite winery. For a moment, I started to melt that he'd remembered my favorite wine from our email exchanges. But then I remembered the way he'd handed me that ticket. The ticket that he still would have written if he'd known I was his date. What was wrong with this guy? The waiter smiled at us. I can already see the sparks flying tonight. I leaned back and crossed my arms and Cooper did the same, the muscles on his forearm flexing as he did so. How did he manage to look so good while being so annoying? The waiter's cheery disposition faltered. May I offer either one of you a sample? Water is just fine for me, I said, narrowing my eyes at Cooper. For me as well, Cooper said, keeping his gaze on mine, and his expression blank. The waiter hesitated, clearly unsure of what had happened between the time Cooper had ordered the thoughtful bottle of wine and now. Finally, the waiter set the wine in a bucket of ice without pouring a sample for either of us. Okay, then. I'll inform you of our specials tonight. Just a salad for me, thank you, I said. The waiter clearly hadn't been expecting me to order right away because he fumbled as he pulled out his notepad. He clicked his pen and held it at the ready. And which salad would the lady prefer this evening? I didn't even look at the menu. Whichever is quickest to prepare. The house? Wonderful. The waiter jotted down my order and shifted so he was facing Cooper. And for you, sir? I'd like the clam chowder. A cup or a bowl? Cooper made a point of looking over at me before answering. Cup. It was so silent between us that I heard the scratch of the waiter's pen as I maintained eye contact with Cooper. I wasn't going to be the first to relent. No way. And what else for you, sir? Cooper didn't even blink. That will do it. Totally obnoxious to order a quick meal just because I had first. What was more annoying was that I couldn't stop comparing Cooper's blue eyes to the color of the sky over the barn earlier. I was trying to be indignant here, but found myself wondering if the dark flecks in his eyes were black or brown. Cooper's expression was blank and the man was obviously as stubborn as a mule, but none of that annoying personality was present in his eyes. They looked soft and sexy. He narrowed them as if trying to look imposing, but merely managed to make my belly do a little flip. Those eyes were driving me crazy. Okay, well, I guess I'll get your order started for you too, the waiter said as he retreated from the table like a hiker who had just stumbled across a pair of mountain lions about to fight. Cooper and I remained silent after the waiter left. We stared at one another from across the table as everyone around us shared conversations. I contemplated leaving, but my overly strict parents raised me to be polite. Plus, my stomach was growling. The time might pass more quickly if we talk about something, Cooper finally said. I considered it and nodded. What would you like to talk about? Traffic laws? He chuckled. Really, Abigail? Fine, I said, letting out an audible sigh so he'd know how put out I was with the concession I was making by continuing with this date after he'd issued me a speeding ticket that he would have given me, date or not. So rude. What kind of movies do you like, Cooper? The Shawshank Redemption? Cool Hand Luke? Funny, he said, the corner of his mouth curving upward. My belly fluttered again. I probably should have let the waiter pour me a glass of wine. Or maybe the bottle. I enjoy watching documentaries, he said, reaching for his water and taking a sip. If they're accurately done. Interesting, I lied, because snooze. Documentaries were what one was forced to watch in school when one had a substitute teacher. As a good and attentive student, I'd been the only one awake during the film while the others slept, mostly because my parents wanted me to get into Harvard and Harvard students didn't sleep through boring documentaries. Unfortunately. What about you, Abigail? He asked, while I pondered where I'd gone wrong in life to get to the point where I thought a date with this man would be a good idea. Finally, I shrugged. Maybe it's cliché, but I love a good rom-com. Interesting, he said, with all of the enthusiasm of someone about to have their wisdom teeth pulled. You don't like rom-coms? I asked. You don't like documentaries? He countered. To be honest with you, I find them rather dry, I said, which I figured was a more eloquent way of putting it than saying, they're a snooze fest, bro. He nodded slowly, a line forming between his eyebrows. Well, I find rom-coms rather unrealistic, overly sentimental, and frankly, a bit pointless. I hoped Elle Woods and Vivian Ward haunted his dreams. Maybe a different subject? I suggested, smiling even though it was seriously painful. Plus, I had to stop gritting my teeth or I'd have none left to chew with by the time my house salad arrived from the kitchen. You were emailing the pet store about adopting a dog when we got sidetracked talking about everything else except the fact that you're a police officer, I said, thinking that might have been a nice heads up. What kind of dog are you looking for? A dog that can be well trained, he said, resting his hand on the table. One that will listen to my commands. Maybe something with a bit of German Shepherd. Ah, he wanted a miniature furry him. I could imagine this dog, probably named Speed Limit or Code Book or Siren, barking at Banana for jumping up on the couch. Doggy ticket for this, doggy ticket for that. No barking after 8 p.m. No running on the sidewalk, only walking. Between Cooper and Speed Limit, Banana and I would probably end up in prison by the end of the weekend. Look, I glanced in the general direction of the kitchen and then looked back to Cooper. Our food should be here soon, so let's just speed round it, okay? He nodded his consent and I sat back. I waved my hand. Toilet paper roll. Under or over? Under is utter nonsense. But when you put it over, you have to pull the paper down, I explained, even though the logic should be obvious. And when you have it under, you get to pull it up, and it's a good reminder to pull up those around you and not pull them down. He gawked at me like I'd just proposed burning all traffic cones in a giant bonfire where we celebrate by driving around it in circles without seatbelts at 100 miles per hour. At least those strong-looking lips weren't in a frown. But it made me yearn to see him crack just a teeny, tiny, itty-bitty smile. I tapped my finger on the tablecloth. Ocean or mountains? Mountains. You? Both. That's not the rules. Cats or dogs? I said, keeping the game moving. His eyes darkened in color. A cat bit me as a child. I widened my eyes. Can't imagine why. If it were possible, there seemed to be even more animosity fuming between the two of us when the waiter returned with the house salad and a cup of clam chowder. He put down the plates like they were scalding hot and hurried away without asking if either of us wanted freshly cracked pepper, probably hadn't wanted to risk staying longer. We ate in silence, punctuated by passive-aggressive spoon clanging or knife scraping. If there was a record for fastest consumption of a meal at the boathouse, we most certainly shattered it. Like a photo finish, we both dropped our utensils at the same moment and stared at each other, each insisting through eye contact alone that they were first. Cooper was so stubborn that he couldn't even admit that I finished my meal first. Or at least just give it to me. He had no problem giving me the ticket after all. I was ready to pronounce this date officially the worst of all time when out of the corner of my eye I saw a man walk over to the table with the 6 men in suits. He started shaking hands with them and most of the patrons turned his way as if they recognized him. "Huh. Officer Hill," the man said as Cooper stood up. "What a coincidence seeing you here." "Good evening, Mr. Mayor." Well, it clearly wasn't John Mayer. But was it the mayor of Sacramento? Cooper turned to me. "Mr. Mayor, this is my acquaintance, Abigail Apple." "Hi," I said, shaking the mayor's hand and wanting to ask him if he could get me out of a speeding ticket. How did Cooper know the mayor? "Hill, we are very much looking forward to hearing which charity the committee selects next week. I understand it will be a very difficult decision." The mayor was clearly not speaking to me, but I butted in nonetheless. Sorry, selects for what?" The mayor turned to me and smiled a wide camera-ready smile before he said, "The city is running a charity drive. Officer Hill is heading the committee that will select which charity will receive the donation." The mayor returned his attention to Cooper. "We are very proud of all the hard work you've put into." "Donation, as in money?" I asked. The mayor's expression revealed a slight annoyance as he turned to me after my interruption. "Yes," he said, looking me up and down and seeming to notice my haphazard appearance. "Officer Hill has helped raise $100,000 to donate to the charity selected by the committee." He made another move to turn back again, but I reached for his arm. "Any charity?" I asked. "Yes, any charity," he explained, seeming to resist the urge to roll his eyes at my continuing interruptions. "The eligibility requirements are on the city website." My heart leapt. "Any charity like, say, a wonderful dog rescue?" Yes, I suppose." $100,000? That should keep Reagan's dog rescue alive for a long time, regardless of how high the new landlord tries to raise rent. $100,000 would mean those dogs could get to keep their home, the sunshine and the rolling hills and the shady oak trees and the warm barn at night. $100,000 for Reagan's charity would make today way less terrible. It could maybe even bump it up to not a bad day at all. I turned to Cooper. "And you decide which charity?" He nodded. "Well, the committee and I decide. I'm the chairperson, but we each get a vote on which charity will receive the donation." I leaned back in my chair and pondered the situation. Cooper being on the committee was bad. Cooper being the head of the committee was worse. I would propose Reagan's dog rescue and he would bang his gavel, I imagined him having one, and explain how I'd violated some rule or another by one over. The dog rescue didn't stand a chance. The mayor said a warm goodbye to Cooper and gave a curt nod to me before continuing on to another table. "I'll take care of the check if you don't want to stick around," Cooper said as he sat back down. "I don't mind." I feigned confusion. "Why wouldn't I want to stick around?" He chuckled. "Very funny." I did realize how sarcastic that sounded given how the night had gone down thus far. No, I said, trying my hardest to sound sincere. "This may have started out as an awkward date, but aren't first dates always a bit that way? In fact, I think we should give a second date a go." He studied my face and I smiled as sweetly as possible. I'd always been told I had a nice smile and I was really pouring it on right now. "You really want another date with me?" he asked slowly. "Sure do." I clapped my hands together as if excited to start date number 2 right now. He gave me a side glance. "But, why?" he asked. I laughed, hoping it sounded genuine. "Why not, silly?" Cooper shook his head, but I caught the hint of a smile as he did so. The upward curve of his mouth made me feel greedy. I wanted a bigger smile, a real smile, an unguarded smile. I imagined it would make him almost too handsome to look at though, and I didn't want to confuse things. This second date would be for the puppies. Why not? Cooper said, repeating my question in an incredulous tone. Because this was as close to a crash and burn date as it gets. No, it's been absolutely lovely. He frowned. Which part exactly was absolutely lovely? His question threw me off. I stuttered for a moment or two. The part where we talked about what kind of dog you're looking for, I answered lamely. And the house salad was pretty decent. Those croutons really nailed the crunch factor. The lettuce had a solid green call. Abigail. Hearing my name from his mouth in that soft tone stopped me dead in my tracks. If I could have convinced myself it wasn't weird, then I would have asked him to say my name like that again. I liked the way it sounded more than I should have. Okay, fine. I'll admit the date wasn't the greatest, I said, leaning forward. But you have to cut me some slack after that ticket and give me one more chance. Today was a rough day for me, and maybe I took it out on you just a little bit. I want the chance to make it up to you. He seemed to be considering my words. I couldn't blame his hesitation. This really and truly was one hot mess of a first date. Who in their right mind would want a second? But to my surprise, he finally nodded. A second chance, he said. For both of us. Then he smiled. A full and genuine smile that nearly knocked me out of my chair. People would assume I was drunk, even though I hadn't even had a sip of the delicious wine sitting in the bottle. He brought a smile to my own mouth before I could stop it. I'll pick you up at your place Saturday, he asked. Quickly, I shook my head. I'll actually come get you if that's all right. He nodded. All right then. A do-over. I nodded, too. A do-over date. After he paid the bill, we left the restaurant and Cooper went in for a handshake at the same time I went in for a hug. The moment was appropriately awkward and weird. I turned to wave goodbye when his back was already turned, and he chose the moment when I turned to, of course, turn to wave goodbye. I wasn't sure if any two people could be on more different wavelengths than the two of us. I was flying high in the sky and he had his feet firmly tethered to the ground. If I went right, he went left. He saw black and white, whereas I saw magenta and teal. As I walked toward my car, I remembered that just an hour ago I had comforted myself with the knowledge that I would never have to see that cop again. And now I was going on a second date with him. What had he called it? A do-over date. But a second chance for who? I told myself it was for the dogs, for Reagan, and for the rescue. I told myself it was even good for the community. I told myself every possible reason except for the one that I feared might also be true, that maybe, just maybe I actually wanted to see Cooper again. Chapter 3. I swear the directions said to make a left at the fork, I said, pressing random buttons on my GPS as I drove down the country road south of the city. Or was it a right? You heard left, didn't you? Cooper glanced over at me. We're lost. No way, I said, shaking my head so hard my long dark ponytail flipped to the other shoulder. That tree looks totally familiar. We must be nearly there. Cooper's eyebrows rose for a second, but then he returned to watching Banana, who was happily sitting in my purse on Cooper's lap. Banana faced the air conditioning vent so that it blew his face. So adorable. Banana is too small to stick his head out of the window, I said, keeping my hands on the wheel. The air conditioning is the next best thing for him. I can see that. A hint of a smile crossed Cooper's face as Banana wagged his tail, clearly enthralled with the blasts of air conditioning. Then Cooper reached his large, strong hand up and scratched behind Banana's tiny ear, making me nearly drive us into a ditch. Men and puppies, there was nothing sweeter than watching the growing affection between the two. "Do you mind if I open the window?" Cooper asked as I followed the GPS instructions so we could make our way to a vineyard I'd promised for our do-over date. "Fine with me." I turned onto a road lined with oak trees. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Cooper lift Banana up to the open window ledge. Banana set his paws on the doorframe and barked in excitement as the fresh air blew in along with the scent of hot summer air and dry grass. His head swiveled to check out everything, and I feared for a moment his tail might wag right off. He turned and looked at me with a happy stare that said, "Can you believe this? Can you even believe this?" "He likes it," Cooper said, with a chuckle. I glanced over, noticing that Cooper's hair was still combed to perfection somehow, even with the wind blowing in through the window. My gaze dropped to his white short-sleeved button-down and his khaki shorts, both of which looked ironed. His shoulders were still rigid, pulled back and at attention. But his expression was different, relaxed. As we drove under the cool shade of the trees and Banana wagged his tail in Cooper's strong grip, there was a piece to my robot's face. An easy smile played at his lips and he leaned his head back against the seat rest, gazing out at the passing countryside. We didn't say much as I drove, far less than we'd said to one another at the restaurant a few nights before, but somehow I felt more communication between us right now. It was good that he was distracted with the scenic drive, too, because it made getting lost on the way to the vineyard seem more believable. "Abigail, how exactly can a tree look familiar?" Cooper sat up straight and leaned over to check the GPS. "Trees all have distinct faces, silly," I said, making another wrong turn. "They also have different personalities and histories, of course. Some trees have so much drama." Cooper rolled his eyes. And here I thought trees only had scientific classifications. "Nope," I said, grinning over at him. "That one back there was an old man with very large ears that he can't seem to keep the squirrels out of. He's laughing all the time because it tickles." "A unique perspective," he said, and then suddenly paused. He fidgeted in his seat as he stared at the window and then he turned to me. "Well, I'll be. That tree did look like it's laughing while swaying in the wind." "See? Now you're catching on," I said, a giddy feeling spreading deep in my chest. He turned to me with a grin. "I'm not sure what you're doing to me. Just enjoying all the trees have to offer with you." I gestured out the window as we exchanged a smile. My belly warmed. I drove us around in winding, looping circles for another 20 minutes before pretending to get frustrated. This GPS thing never seems to work right out here. "I have my cell phone," Cooper said, reaching for his back pocket. "Just tell me the address of the vineyard and I'll pull up the map." Well, that would be hard for me to do since there was no vineyard out here. I placed my hand on his wrist before he could pull out his phone. "I think it's just up here on the left," I said, studying his face to see if he was buying it. A few seconds later I realized my hand was still on his wrist. He'd stopped trying to get his phone, but I hadn't removed my hand. My gaze darted back to the road as my hand sat there on his, frozen. Finally, I cleared my throat and pulled back my hand. My eyes darted to his hand again and I found myself wondering what it would be like to intertwine my fingers with his. It took everything in me to resist. A thick tension filled the car that felt palpable. We drove in silence, the tension only seeming to grow stronger even though I kept my gaze fixed on the road. When we arrived at a familiar intersection, I craned my neck to read the sign I had memorized. "Rescue at the barn. Come say hi and then stay to play." "That doesn't sound like a vineyard," Cooper said, leaning forward in his seat to look up the hill toward the big red barn. "It has to be close," I said, turning on my turn signal. Let me just pop in at this barn and ask for directions. I have my phone. I shook my head. This will be easier than typing something into a phone, he asked, reaching for his back pocket. Does your human interaction programming need an update? I asked. I'm not a robot. Some signs seem contradictory to that statement. I pulled into the small gravel lot beside Reagan's barn just as she and I had planned over the phone the night before. I'd arrived with Cooper exactly on time. After pulling the scheme off, maybe I'd apply for the CIA, Banana would look adorable in a little spy suit. And maybe I could find one for me on sale. Wait right here and I'll go ask for directions, all right? I asked, hopping out of the car before he could protest. Cooper struggled to hold onto a squirming Banana who clearly wanted to get out with me. That's because he knew all his friends were here. Oh, no. Banana was going to bust the whole operation wide open. I shot him a keep it cool look and smiled at Cooper as I shut the door. Be right back. I wiggled my fingers at Cooper and then jogged to the barn. I slipped inside, accidentally leaving the door open. I found Reagan inside by the dog's pen. Abigail, you know this idea is crazy, right? She whispered as I knelt down to scratch some ears and receive some sloppy kisses. If by crazy you mean brilliant, then yes, this is crazy, I said, waving my imaginary magic wand in the air. Release the hounds. She rolled her eyes and sighed, but undid the latch and swung open the door to the pen. The dozen or so dogs and a handful of puppies bolted toward the— oh, no, did I leave that open door exactly as I had planned? Reagan moved to go after them, but I held her back. Let him drown in the cuteness for a minute or two, I said. She leaned against a post and crossed her arms. Do you really think this is going to work? We're about to find out. I tilted my head and heard a car door open as the dogs barked. I imagined Cooper buried under a pile of fluffy paws and wet kisses and wagging tails. How could he possibly vote for another charity to receive the committee's donation after meeting these precious bundles of joy? Saving this rescue would be easy peasy lemon squeezy. I knew I hadn't been 100% honest, but it was for a good cause. Abigail? Cooper asked, his voice barely audible over the barking dogs. Right on cue, I said, pushing up onto my feet. See you in 30 seconds. Reagan started to protest, but I shushed her with a finger to my lips and ran back through the open door of the barn. I imagined the sight I would see would rank fairly high on the cuteness scale, but I didn't expect it to be off the cuteness scale. Cooper had Banana wedged under his arm and he was laughing uncontrollably as he was assaulted with doggy love. A few of the more athletic dogs had even managed to scale my car and licked at Cooper's ears and the back of his neck. Abigail, he called again, catching me watching him with an unstoppable grin on my face. I sprang into action. Shoot, was this my fault? I asked, using as innocent a voice as possible. I pushed through the dogs and grabbed Banana from Cooper. He wiggled to be set down to play with the others. Did I leave the door open? What do we do? He asked right before Hank, a massive teddy bear of a dog, pressed Cooper against the passenger side door with his front paws splayed across Cooper's white shirt and muscular chest. That was going to leave a stain, no doubt about it. I tried to hold back my laughter, but the wiry terrier on the roof of my car was rooting his nose into Cooper's hair and it was making playing my role very difficult. We should try to get them back into the barn or— Hey, dogs, get on back in here. I turned to see Reagan coming out of the barn and putting her fingers to her mouth and whistling high and loud. The dogs ran to her immediately, all except the terrier who needed one last sniff of Cooper's hair before finally hopping off my hood and joining the others. Cooper sagged against the passenger side door and raked a hand through his hair. Sorry about that, folks," Reagan called, walking over toward us. We had gone back and forth about it over the phone the night before, but I'd finally managed to convince her that it would be better if we pretended not to know each other. "Hi, I'm Reagan Carlton," she said, extending her hand to Cooper. "Cooper Hill," he said, wiping the dog slobber onto his shorts before shaking her hand. "I'm Abigail Apple," I said, wincing at the tiny lie. She nodded and stuffed her hands into her pockets. "Are you looking into adoption or interested in volunteering?" I glanced over at Cooper. "Oh, we were actually." "Today has been insane," Reagan interrupted, just as we had practiced. "I had some volunteers cancel last minute, so it's just me here. The dogs are filthy and I need to run into town for some more food. Sorry, I don't mean to ramble, but I'm so overwhelmed right now." Her performance was a little stilted and forced. She certainly wasn't going to be winning any Academy Awards, but hopefully it would do the trick. I shifted awkwardly from foot to foot, trying to look sheepish. "Well, actually, we kind of just pulled in to ask for some directions. We're on our way to the local vineyard and we're already pretty late in. We could help out for a bit though," Cooper suggested, putting a hand on my arm. "Huh?" I turned to Cooper, who moved closer to me. My skin warmed under the weight of his hand on my arm. "You don't mind volunteering here?" "Fine by me if it's okay with you, Abigail," he said, giving me a pointed look. "I know you were excited about taking me to the vineyard." I tapped my chin, pretending to mull it over. He placed his hand at the small of my back and looked into my eyes. I froze for a moment. His eyes were so blue and kind-looking that I felt unable to move. No, I mean, yeah," I said, clearing my throat. "Sure, we can help out for a bit." Cooper smiled at Reagan. "We're in. What would you like us to do?" Now that Big Hank had been brushed and shampooed and rinsed, he rolled over onto his back in front of Cooper, who rubbed his belly with one hand. Another dog trotted over and sat next to Cooper, who began scratching the dog's ear. I melted a little at how sweet Cooper was. Okay, maybe I melted a lot. Banana curled up next to two of the puppies and his paws served as some sort of blanket for the tuckered-out pair. I sat across from Cooper. Both of us were filthy and covered in wet dog hair, but it didn't matter. In the cool barn, the shadows stretched longer and longer and time seemed completely and utterly non-existent. My kind of a day. I twisted my lips to one side, grabbed a piece of hay, and crossed my legs, accidentally nudging one of the paws belonging to the sleeping terrier next to me. He kicked his legs, surely running after a rabbit in his dreams. "I have something to confess," I said. "Finally admitting you deserved that speeding ticket?" Cooper gave me a wink that made me weak in the knees and I wasn't even standing. I bit my lip. "Maybe I have two things to confess." He smiled. "Go on then." I tilted my head and gazed into those blue eyes that lit up with kindness. Man, I was such a female Pinocchio. If my nose started growing, I could only blame myself. "Remember how I got lost this afternoon in the car on the way to the vineyard? Well, it may have been just a little bit intentional." He chuckled. "I have something to confess, too." "You do?" I saw Cooper stop rubbing Big Hank's belly, so the dog wiggled closer to Cooper as if to say hint, hint. Once Cooper started the belly scratching again, the dog's tongue lolled out of his mouth. "What could you confess? You don't like wine?" He closed an eye, glancing across the dim, dusty air between us. "I knew you were getting lost on purpose." I gawked at him. "You did not." "Afraid so." He nodded, seeming to get a kick out of my embarrassment. Even if I wasn't a trained professional at interrogation, which I am, you're not exactly sly. My cheeks heated. Oh, the humiliation. And here I'd thought I excelled at sneakiness. Why didn't you rat me out? I asked, trying to decide if that would have been more or less embarrassing. Tough call. Your motivations seemed well-intentioned. He shrugged, giving Big Hank one final rub before wiping his hand on his shorts. Reagan is doing great work here. I can see why you're eager to have the committee support the shelter. Really? I looked up at him and he smiled. Reagan needs a huge donation in a bad way. She's renting this place and the landlord is selling. The buyer could refuse to rent the place any longer or could raise the rent so high she can't afford it anymore. It kills me that these sweet dogs might be sent away to who knows where. He nodded. I get where you're coming from. But why not just tell me the truth? For real? I asked, surprised he'd even ask. Maybe because you'd never vote for this charity if you knew I'm involved with it? His eyebrows shot up. Why would you think that? No sense in mincing words. Because you don't like me. Is that what you think? He started to scoot closer to me, but Big Hank protested with a whine. He gave me a look that said, I tried. Abigail, I know our first date had a few speed bumps. You had to use the word speed, didn't you? I asked, shaking my head. Sorry. He raised his palms. I know the date wasn't perfect and we've bumped heads a little bit. A little bit? I asked, incredulously. He put a finger to my lips. But I don't not like you, Abigail. Gee, what a compliment, I said, my lips moving under his finger. Should I swoon now or later? That's not what I meant to say. He reached for my hand and held it. I feel drawn to you. I don't know how else to describe it. My eyes bulged. Really? You drive crazy, he said, his voice low and soft. But you're also spunky and fun and you have a big heart. It's clear you care deeply about these dogs. You see things full of life, in ways I never do. And, well, like I said, I don't not like you. I smiled and bit my lip. I don't not like you, too. Or is it either? His blue eyes locked on mine and for the first time in my life I wished I wasn't in a room full of napping puppies. Even so, there was no doubt as we looked into each other's eyes that there was a connection. A spark there. The sound of tires crunching across the gravel filled the air as Reagan returned from her emergency run into town to get food. When she came over, I had to tell her the jig was up. I even told Cooper she had stored food in the silo that could last for months. Reagan blushed, but I bailed her out by admitting the scheme had been my idea. As Cooper and I walked toward my car with Banana running at our feet, I noticed that Cooper's always perfectly combed hair was messy. It suited him. Before I could chicken out, I reached up and pushed the hair that had fallen across his brow back into place. He surprised me by smiling and then messing it back up without a word. Today was a perfect day. An absolutely perfect day. The birds were chirping, the sky was blue, the wind warm and gentle. Right now, I expected a rainbow to pop up despite there being no rain or even a rain cloud in the sky. It was all just that perfect. So, you'll be voting for Reagan's dog rescue for the charity drive then? I asked, as we stood outside my car, ready to take the country road back downtown. There was a pause and I glanced over at Cooper who avoided my gaze. Actually, no. My mouth dropped open and my heart sank at those two words. Worst day of my life. Chapter 4. On Monday morning, I dove into the deepest, darkest, scariest corner of my closet, scouring it until I finally found what I was looking for, my power suit. When I dropped out of law school, I swore I'd never put this suit back on, but desperate times called for desperate measures. And these were the most desperate of times. Cooper told me he was planning on voting for Founding Friendships, a homeless outreach program in Sacramento, and not Reagan's rescue at the barn. Even after a magical afternoon of playing with the dogs in the sun, he was still intent on robbing them of a safe, nice home. I thought puppy kisses would be my secret weapon. No dice. I'd returned home Saturday evening feeling distraught. I'd played my top card and it hadn't been enough. I'd failed the puppies. But then I realized I'd used the best devices that would work on someone like me. But I wasn't trying to convince myself to vote for the dog rescue. I mean, hello? I'd hand over a ton of dough if I had it. No, the person I needed to convince was Officer Cooper Hill. So, I needed to speak his language. Robot language. And it just so happened that I was fluent. Staying up way too late last night, I toiled with a software program to put together my upcoming presentation. I created slide after slide, constructed pie chart after pie chart, and calculated cost-benefit analysis after cost-benefit analysis until my fingers bled. Not really, but I would have kept going until they did if I had to. I finished the slideshow at 3:43 a.m. The rest of the night, or, morning hours, I spent practicing my presentation, rubbing polish on my black heels from college, and testing which of my friend Hannah's prescription-less glasses made me look the most authoritative. And at 7:47 a.m., I tied a makeshift tie around Banana's neck and left my apartment with zero sleep and a conviction that this plan would definitely work. I didn't consider that perhaps the two were correlated. Trying not to fidget in my itchy, slim-fitting, power suit from my Abigail Adams days, that I could now see was in desperate need of some color or fringe, I marched down the sidewalk and straight onto the front steps of the Sacramento police station. Abigail Apple, where are you off to in such a hurry this early in the morning? Courtney Carmichael called from her coffee cart just down the sidewalk. Courtney Carmichael owned the coffee cart with the cinnamon dolce lattes I indulged in often. We had law school in common since she was an ex-attorney who burned out after working 24/7 for 2 decades with only material possessions to show for all of her efforts. Her husband divorced her from lack of attention and she realized she'd wasted all that time working when relationships were more important. Now, she always wears sparkly fun tops as a reminder that there is more to life than work. The coffee cart is Courtney's do-over in life and I admired her for that brave choice. Good morning, Courtney. I'm off to defend justice and stand up for those who cannot stand up for themselves. I plan to triumph for everything that is good and pure in this world. I climbed the first couple of steps, my eyes set on the front doors of the station. But you haven't heard my next name suggestion yet, Courtney called after me. A couple of weeks ago, Courtney had started the name game. She'd chosen career over kids and was now pondering what she could have named a kid if she'd taken the time to have one. I figured it was some form of therapy for her, so I was usually happy to play. Sorry, can't today, Courtney. I waved a hand. Justice waits for no one. I'll give you a free latte. My newly polished heel stopped midair above the next step and I tapped my finger against the briefcase, which held my laptop with my presentation. I supposed justice could wait for a free latte. As manager of a pet store, I was on a tight budget, after all. Turning on my heel, I hurried back down to Courtney's coffee cart. This morning she sported a bright orange shirt with sequins around the collar and front pocket. She smiled as she steamed the milk and then gestured to me. I've got the right name this time, Abigail. Let's hear it. She took 2 stir sticks and did a makeshift drum roll. Catherine Karina Carmichael. I winced as she handed over the latte. Then I slipped a couple of bucks into her tip jar. A girl named Catherine snatched my prom date away from me senior year. It's a lovely name, but I can't in good conscience give it my stamp of approval. I'll keep at it then. Courtney jerked her chin up at the police station. What are you up to in there? No trouble, I hope. Oh, no, I answered, sipping the sweet nectar called caffeine. I'm on a quest to convince Officer Hill to vote for Reagan's rescue at the barn. He's in charge of a super big donation and her rescue needs it pronto. Ah, yes. He's heading the committee. Courtney nodded, which didn't surprise me. She knew all of the comings and goings in Sacramento. Cooper Hill is pretty involved with the homeless charity, Founding Friendships, though, isn't he? Is there anything going on in Sac that you don't know? I grinned and tapped my laptop case. But he's not going to be all about Founding Friendships for long if I have anything to say about it. Other charities need help, too. And I have a lot to say about the dog rescue to convince him it should be his top priority today. Trust me. Before Courtney could argue with my brilliant plan, I thanked her for the latte, bid her goodbye and hurried toward the stairs. Taking a deep, steadying breath, I marched straight up the steps and pushed open both doors for my grand entrance to the station. One of the doors stuck, but my enthusiastic forward motion made my forehead slam into the door. Forehead, pain, ouch. Not the grand entrance I'd envisioned. How can I help you, miss? The attendant at the front desk asked, giving me a look that said he thought I was a whack job. I straightened, recovering from that slight embarrassment. I need an empty conference room and Officer Hill pronto, I said, giving him a smile. Your help is appreciated by me, a barn full of dogs and the world at large. Thanks. A few minutes later, the attendant showed me to a conference room where I set up my laptop, with the door cracked open behind me. I turned to see Cooper poke his head inside, looking around until his gaze caught mine from where I stood by the projector screen. Abigail, what are you doing? Officer Hill, come in. I waved both of my hands toward me several times in the gesture meaning get in here and watch my brilliant presentation. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your very busy workday to meet with me. You do a lot for our community, so I took the liberty of bringing you a latte as a token of my appreciation. Hey, a little bribery never hurt anyone. I'd only taken one sip and I'd wiped off the lipstick stain, so don't judge me. Oh, wait. Had I wiped off my lipstick smear? Abigail, I don't know what this is all about. Please, just come all the way in, I said, grabbing him by the arm, which was quite muscular in a very distracting way, and rather forcibly dragging him to the chair I'd set up in the front row of the conference room. Have a seat. He stumbled back and fell into the chair under my direction. Okay, I had to admit he'd let me pull him. The guy was a fit officer, after all. A huge criminal wouldn't stand a chance against him, let alone little 5'4" me. Oh, the hero factor. Shiver. He squinted at the screen and read the title of my presentation, An Analytical Argument for the Selection of Rescue at the Barn as the Sacramento Charity Committee's winner of the annual charity drive donation, Why Rescue at the Barn Makes the Most Sense for the City, the People of the City, and Humanity at Large. Yep, that title didn't miss a thing. Nailed it. I nodded, ready with my pointer, which, in actuality, was a couple of stir sticks I'd nabbed from Courtney's coffee cart and taped together hastily. It was a wobbly pointer, but I figured it would do the trick. First critique, Cooper said, studying the illuminated screen in the otherwise dark room. Title is a bit wordy if I'm being honest. He looked so good in his police uniform that I let his negative feedback slide. I mean, the thought of running my hand down his muscular arm and then alongside his badge? Yeah, it sent shivers down my spine. Big time. But I shook them off and pulled back my shoulders. The dogs needed me. I wouldn't let them down. Thank you for your honesty, Officer Hill, I said, even though I didn't care two peanuts if he thought my title was wordy. The wordier the better, in my humble opinion. Or, my confident opinion to be more accurate. I cleared my throat, getting ready with the professional voice I'd used so well before dropping out of law school. I welcome your feedback, but please hold all questions and comments until the end of the presentation. He frowned and glanced around the room. Exactly how long will this ta? First, a history of rescue at the barn. With a click of my keyboard, the slideshow began, the greatest presentation of all time. In the end, the answer to Cooper's question was that the presentation took 83 minutes. My lecture covered the benefits this dog rescue has for the city, including statistics about the health benefits of walking a dog and the mental health benefits of loving a dog. I also did a deep dive into the cost to the city if Reagan's rescue at the barn had to close and the dogs had to be supported by the already crowded publicly funded animal shelters. I was expansive about how exactly Reagan would effectively and efficiently employ the donation. I may have dropped out of Harvard Law, but certainly not before I learned how to be extremely convincing. Physical interaction with the doggies hadn't done the trick in swaying Cooper, but my presentation would appeal to his analytical, logical, black and white numbers brain perfectly. How could he say no after this? Rescue at the barn made perfect sense. Admittedly, I think Banana fell asleep after like 3 minutes, but numbers weren't really his forte. Running away from pigeons, though? Totally engaged. Anyway, I clenched my fist at my side in victory as I finished my presentation and clicked to my final slide, which was a thorough listing of all my sources, APA style, of course. Well, I said. It wasn't that I expected him to give me a standing ovation, although it would have been welcomed and well-deserved, but, still. I hadn't expected Cooper to gape at the screen in the dark, empty conference room, with his mouth slightly open. I mean, his reaction didn't exactly scream impressed. When he continued to remain silent and stare at the screen, I finally followed his gaze to the screen to make sure I hadn't made a mistake in my citations. Nope, everything was perfect. What did you think? I asked, my tone perky and optimistic. He finally turned his head my way, while I waited for the expected reaction and applause. Instead, he frowned and then raised his hand. I tilted my head. Officer Hill? May I ask questions now? Did his tone sound annoyed or was it just me? Yes, please. We welcome questions, I said, realizing I'd used the plural when there was only me standing here. He moved his head slowly back and forth, as if he had so many questions he had to ponder which one to ask first. This seemed kind of surprising. I thought he would have handed over the money for the dog straight away after this. But professional questions did show that he's giving my presentation proper consideration from his analytic mind. What exactly are you wearing? He asked, finally. I glanced down at my suit. I'm not sure of the brand actually. He chuckled. Since when do you wear suits? Or the color black? Trying to be professional. I shrugged, glancing down at my boring outfit. I didn't want to distract from the presentation and just wanted to blend into the background, you know? He stood and I gave him a curious look as he moved in closer. Abigail Apple, he said, his voice low and sexy, which made the distance between us feel even smaller. It would be impossible for you to blend into any background. And I'm distracted by you every second. My belly did a cartwheel as I stared into his eyes, which seemed to glow like a sunlit lake in the light of the projector. Any other questions? Since when do you say words like analytics and cost-benefit analysis and population density? My shoulders slumped and I glanced away, afraid of how bright my cheeks would grow if I looked up into his eyes. So, I stared at my toes and shrugged. This wasn't going so well. I wanted to sound smart, I said, deciding to be honest. What do you mean sound smart? You are smart. He reached for my hand, wrapping his fingers around mine. Tingles skittered up along my skin. Well, I certainly hadn't expected this reaction from my presentation. Was my robot really holding my hand? His hand sure felt human, though. Warm. Soft. Strong. I couldn't say I hated it. More like freaking loved it. He wasn't a robot after all. You're also sweet, persistent, and caring. I didn't need a presentation to learn those things about you. I see it in every smile, every glance, every laugh, he said. You do? I asked, as he squeezed my hand, which was a good thing because I think my body had gone numb. My eyes went wide as he leaned in close to me. You ready for my final question? He asked, his breath warm against my cheek. No, yes. Do you know I haven't stopped thinking about you since we left the barn? He asked, his mouth curving upward into a sweet smile. My heart melted. Really? He nodded. Really? I suddenly swayed on my feet and Cooper steadied me with his strong hands on my elbows. Swooning for me already? He asked, obviously joking, but there was also concern evident in his voice. No, yes, my face heated and I twirled a piece of my hair. I stayed up all night working on this presentation and my batteries are running a bit low. Let me drive you home. He pulled keys from his pocket as if the matter had been decided. No, I wouldn't want to bother you any further when I've already taken you away from your job for so long. I'll drive myself home. I went to move past him to grab my purse, which held a still snoozing banana, looking adorable with his tie. I'll ask you. A line formed between Cooper's eyebrows. If you get behind the wheel, then I'll be forced to give you another ticket. I whirled back around, which turned out to be a bad idea since blood rushed to my head. Excuse me? I asked. Driving with sleep deprivation can be as dangerous as driving intoxicated, he said, fingers looped into his pockets as he rocked on his heels. You're impaired and thus a danger to those around you. I narrowed my eyes at him. Are you threatening me with another ticket? Yes. Just so you can drive me home? He grinned. Yes. Isn't that an abuse of power, Mr. By the Book? He shrugged. My car is out front. A little thrill rolled through me. Then I guess we're going for a ride. Confused and disoriented, I woke up in my bed and had to check my alarm clock to discover it was after 5 p.m. The smell of food wafted into my room, so I stumbled down the hall to find out what my friend Hannah was cooking. She turned to me as I entered the kitchen. Hey there, sleepyhead, she said. Where is Cooper? Officer McHottie? She asked, letting out a loud whistle. He dropped you off, literally dropped you off, this morning. I frowned. What? She laughed. Yeah, I was here doing some work from home and heard a knock on the door. And there you were, knocked out in the arms of the hottest cop I've ever seen. What? I asked, unable to remember a single lick of any of that. Uh-huh. She nodded, testing the sauce she was making by lifting the wooden spoon to her mouth. He said you fell asleep seconds after you got in his car. He didn't want to wake you up and said something about you staying up all night. Is that true? Anyway, I pointed him to your room and he carried you in. I covered my face in embarrassment. Oh, no. Oh, yes. He even tucked Banana in next to you and then left after giving you a kiss to your cheek. You have no idea how jealous I am right now. I touched my cheek and imagined Cooper's lips pressed against my skin. My first kiss with him, and I was dead asleep. Typical. Just typical. She glanced over her shoulder as she stirred the boiling pasta. When he left, he said he'd text you later. He did? I asked, sprinting back to my room. Banana licked my hand as I searched my purse for my phone. I pulled out my phone and opened Cooper's text. Very thorough presentation, Ms. Apple. You've given me a lot to consider. P.S. I saved your life by not letting you get behind the wheel. P.S.S. Banana thinks he's a police dog now. Hope that's okay. Everything was so okay now. He had to donate the money to Reagan's dog rescue after today. He just had to. Chapter 5. The next day around dinner time, a couple of my friends stopped by the pet store I managed so we could all play catch-up. This was a ritual we indulged in often, sometimes over coffee, sometimes over drinks, and this time over Chinese takeout from Walk-In Roll since I'd skipped my hour lunch break. Yum. We'd spent the last 30 minutes discussing Hannah's recent work dilemma. She had always liked her boss, but this week her boss had upped her work duties drastically, including assigning her to give a speech at an upcoming conference. A very public speech. To say Hannah wasn't thrilled would be putting it mildly. Important question for you, Hannah. I lifted my chopsticks from my empty chicken chow mein bowl and raised them in the air. Would you rather have a dog lick peanut butter off of your toes while being forced to hold still or give a 3-minute public speech? Stop coming up with these crazy scenarios, she said, busting out in a fit of giggles. She clutched her side in unstoppable laughter, and our friend Krista wiped away a tear while wheezing in a shaky breath. You're scaring the residents with that laugh, I said, unsure of which was louder, my two friends or the shrieking parakeets. The birds' calls echoed against the exposed brick walls all the way up to the tall ornate ceiling, with Hannah and Krista's laughter following. I took one of the dog chew toys I'd been stocking and beamed it at Hannah. The fluffy ball bounced off of her shoulder with a satisfying squeak, which only caused Hannah to laugh harder. Finally, she groaned. Seriously, though, my boss is driving me nuts. I'll bet Jennifer only assigned the speech to me because she doesn't want to do it herself. It's part of her job. So why am I the one stuck doing it? The question of the day. I patted her arm before leaving to check a customer out at the register. The woman was buying fresh bedding for her child's hamster, and we made quick chit-chat as she paid. After she left, I returned to find Hannah feeding Einstein, the pet store's resident turtle. She held out a piece of lettuce, mumbling to him about her fear of public speaking. She sighed dramatically, while Krista pulled a white rabbit from its cage. I mean, come on, Hannah said in protest. I'd rather file documents all day long and get a paper cut from each and every document than give this public speech. Round and round we went, each of us trying to come up with something outrageous we'd rather do than give a speech. Hannah had taken a public speaking class when we were all together at UC Davis. Her face before each class matched the 70s green couch Krista's grandmother had kindly gifted to us for our apartment, no matter how many times we insisted we didn't want it. That class had been a rough time for Hannah. I'd never seen anyone happier about a D+. D stands for Dunzo, she pronounced after her final class, proudly waving her C final project. Goodbye forever, public speaking. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. She'd clearly spoken too soon. All right, I have a good one. Krista scratched the white rabbit behind its ear. Is giving a 5-minute speech in front of total strangers worse than being stuck on a 5-day road trip with your entire family in a Mini Cooper? Hannah frowned. You know I have 4 brothers, right? Krista grinned. Exactly. Tapping her chin, Hannah pondered this latest hat in the ring. Einstein crawled forward to chew at the lettuce that she held farther away due to her state of distraction. Road trip, Hannah finally answered, unknowingly moving the lettuce out of Einstein's reach again. He hurried as fast as he could to get at it, which was maybe faster than a snail. Just maybe. I could strap Harry and Joe to the top, make Peter run beside the car, and I'm sure I could squeeze Greg in the trunk. Then I'd have room to bring the two of you, too. Crystal laughed. You can't just tie. The bell above the front door to the pet store rang, signaling a new customer. I looked up to see Cooper enter, looking professional, and oh so hot, in his police uniform. Did you know he was coming? Hannah whispered, glancing over at me. Crystal leaned forward. Abigail knows that guy? What have I missed? Fill me in already. That's her hottie cop, who I told you about, she answered. He's not my hottie cop, I corrected, thinking the fact was unfortunate. He's the rigid, black and white, rule follower, who won't vote for the dog shelter cop. Krista hummed. That's him? He is smokin'. I elbowed her in the side, just as Cooper came up to me. Cooper, hi, I said, standing up and steering him away from Krista and Hannah before they could say anything to embarrass me. Did I trust my friends with my life? Yes. Did I trust them not to ask Cooper nosy questions? Not in the slightest. My eyebrows came together. What are you doing here? He chuckled. Nice to see you, too. I reached out and touched his elbow. I didn't mean it that way, I just... Wait, I was touching his elbow. Why was I touching him and feeling like that had been a totally natural thing to do? I could hear Krista and Hannah behind us whispering, and my face heated as I, reluctantly, removed my hand from his arm. I just meant that I wasn't expecting to see you here, I said rather lamely, staring at my toes. Hi, Cooper, Hannah called from where Einstein grumpily chased after the constantly moving piece of lettuce. I sent her a don't you dare embarrass me glare and then a please don't embarrass me plea look just to cover all my bases. Doesn't Abigail look pretty today? Hannah asked Cooper, completely ignoring both my vicious eye threat and my puppy dog eyes. Let's talk over here, I said, leading Cooper further away and stopping at the fish tanks on the opposite side of the store. Over his tall shoulder I could just catch sight of Hannah and Krista whispering with one another. I tried to ignore them as best I could. My cheeks didn't need to get any redder. I was sure they were approaching the color of the lights on top of Cooper's police car. What's up? I asked. My approach at sounding cool failed big time as my voice cracked. Cooper graciously ignored it and smiled down at me. What do you think about another date? He asked. I didn't get a chance to ask you yesterday since you passed out in my car. Yeah, sorry about that. I scratched the back of my neck. I was up kind of late putting together my presentation and didn't get much, well, any, sleep. That drool is never coming out of my shirt. What? I drooled on you? I asked, reminding myself to ask Hannah and Krista if public speaking is worse than drooling on the arm of a cute guy who is driving you home. I'd so pick the speech in that scenario. Cooper, I'm so sorry. If you give me the shirt, I can try some bleach. I noticed a twitch at the corners of Cooper's mouth and paused. Wait a minute, I rolled my eyes. You're joking with me? He nodded. I am indeed. Relief washed over me and I decided this playful side of him wasn't all that bad. I could even grow to like it a teeny, tiny bit if it didn't involve my drool. So, he said, clapping his hands together. Date? Behind Cooper's back, Hannah and Krista swooned dramatically onto the fluffy stack of dog beds and I tried not to laugh out loud. Sure, I said, giving him what I hoped was a casual shrug. Another date would be fun. When were you thinking? The corners of his mouth curved upward. Now. Whatever joke program they uploaded into your motherboard is running well. Hats off to the developer, I said, to my funny RoboCop before moving back to the cash register. I found my calendar under the counter and flipped through it. I'm free on Friday. Does that work? I don't want to wait until Friday to spend more time with you, he said, resting his elbows on the counter and leaning across so that his lips were dangerously close to my ear. And I wasn't joking, Abigail. I pulled back, giving him an assessing look. An impromptu date? Was this the same follow-the-rules man who had given me a ticket just a few days ago? You want to go on a date right now? I asked, searching his eyes for any sign of a joke. His eyes darkened. Preferably at this second. My belly did a little flip. I can't. Cooper looked surprised. Can't? I'm working, Cooper. And judging by your uniform, you are too. My shift just ended. Mine hasn't. I moved away from him to prevent my blurting out that I would go with him because I so wanted to have that date. But, hello? A robot was not the right person for me, especially one who refused to vote for Reagan's rescue at the barn, which was so near and dear to my heart. I busied myself flipping through a magazine of new dog products. Cooper's steps echoed as he followed after me. He took the magazine between two fingers and twisted it around. Might be easier to read facing the right side up. Thanks, I muttered, my cheeks heating. What was wrong with me? The guy was scrambling my brain. Might I ask what time you'd be free to go on a date with me? He asked, lowering his head so I could no longer avoid his gaze. Yes, clock, I said, my finger pointing to it in victory. I don't get off until 7 and I would never expect you to wait around. Sorry, can't go because it's not 7 yet and I'm not off until 7, I said, chastising myself internally for not keeping it cool. So, yeah, I can't. I'll cover for you, Krista hollered from across the aisle. I sent her a look and she winked. I'd never regretted hiring my friend to work here until now. No, I need to shut down and lock up. She grinned. I can close up shop, no problem. You're not on duty today, I said, shaking my head. This is my shift and I'm supposed to be here until 7 and, well, I just can't. Sorry. Because it's not 7, I said, pointing at the wall clock behind me that had paw print hands. Cooper glanced at the clock and straightened. It's 6:53. Not 7, I said, cringing at the 7-minute hole in my argument. So let me get this straight, he said, speaking slowly. You can't go on a date with me because you're following a rule? A hint of a smile played at his lips despite how hard I could see him trying to hold it back. I bit my lip and fidgeted with the hem of my shirt. His eyes narrowed. You, Abigail Apple, are following a rule? I raised a shoulder. Yes? Sweetie, we need a discussion, Hannah said, coming up behind me. She slipped her arm through mine, gave Cooper a nose wrinkle, and held a finger up. Then she swung me around to do an about-face and dragged me away. She'll be right back. She tugged me into my office at the back of the store and Krista followed in after, closing the door behind her. Hannah crossed her arms. What do you think you're doing? What? I'm at work. I've covered for you plenty of times, Krista said, rolling her eyes. I even closed up for you that time you ditched out early because Shapley Shoes in the Gold Rush Center was having that buy one get one half off sale. Hannah nodded. Need we go on? I'm not really into him, I said, throwing my hands up in the air. I mean, he and I argued through our first date and it was awful. I only went on a second date with him because he is heading the committee that is allotting a substantial donation to a local charity, and I want him to vote for Reagan's rescue at the barn so she doesn't have to shut down. Hannah and Krista turned to face one another and then burst out laughing. Okay. Not the reaction I'd expected. I crossed my arms. What's so funny? Krista wiped a tear from her cheek. Abigail, honey, it is so obvious that you like him, like really, really like him, she said, while she continued laughing so severely she started hiccuping. But you're obviously in denial about that little fact. I am not, I protested. Yeah, you're completely gaga for him, Hannah added. You should have seen your face when you walked into the store. Your eyes went wider than when you saw that kitten wearing a tutu at lunch last week. Krista gulped in a giant breath and nodded. When you two were talking together, your cheeks turned red and you kept staring at your shoes. You only get nervous like that when you really like someone. Hannah reached over and squeezed my elbow. You also said his name in your sleep after he dropped you off. Several times. My eyes bulged. What? Hannah laughed. Okay, I just threw that last part in for fun. Totally kidding, she said, stifling another giggle. But, seriously, stop being lame. You like him. We all know it, so you may as well admit it to yourself. Now, Krista has things under control here. Get lost. I thrust my hands to my hips. You're forcing me to leave? Think of it as a friendly nudge. She shooed me out the office door and back into the store, even as I tried to protest. Abigail's ready now, Hannah announced, pushing me toward the counter as I tried to sneak around her to duck back inside my office. Aren't you, sweetie? I was about to make another excuse why I couldn't go on a date with Cooper when I looked over at him and found my words entirely gone. One look into his eyes and I realized my friends were right, I did like him. For words I never thought I'd think just a week earlier when he pulled me over. Or when he refused to give me a warning and gave me a ticket instead. Or when he said he liked documentaries. Or when he admitted he put the toilet paper over instead of under. Or, worst of all, when he said he was voting for the homeless shelter instead of Reagan's rescue at the barn. But I liked him. I liked Officer Hill. I liked RoboCop. And I wanted to go on another date with him. A real one. Immediately, this very second if not sooner, which scared me big time. Okay, I'm ready, I said, stepping toward Cooper, even though I was in no way ready for these feelings that I couldn't deny any longer. Chapter 6. Well, my dreams of a romantic, scenic, rom-com-esque date died a quick death when Cooper parked his car in front of a chain-link fence half covered in weeds and half covered in entangled pieces of trash. If I squinted, then the blue plastic bag flapping in the wind kind of looked like waves by a major stretch of imagination. Pretend waves could be romantic, right? A rust-covered lock glared at me from where it hung on a thick chain, which was looped 5 times over to hold the gate together, blocking off a dirt road that led to an old water tower. A no trespassing sign on that gate, faded from years in the sun, tilted so far I expected each gust of wind to send it crashing onto the dusty ground. The only thing missing was the eerie call of a vulture in this abandoned area of town. And perhaps a tumbleweed or two. Even Banana cowered from the window at the desolate sight in front of us. Please tell me we're lost. My desperate tone became more of a squeak. That we're actually on our way to an intimate dinner and you got lost. That's what's really happened. Right? He shook his head. Nope. Maybe you took a wrong turn on our way to a llama petting zoo and got lost? I rolled down my window and looked around hopefully. Surely there's a llama farm around here somewhere. Or, you put in the wrong address for a helicopter ride over Sacramento, and that's the reason we are sitting in an empty lot with a gate in front of an old water tower. Wrong again. He smiled over at me and patted me on the shoulder. I can turn on my GPS, I offered, still holding on to the tiny bit of hope I clung to. Relax, Abigail. He laughed and turned off the ignition, got out of his car, and walked around to the passenger side door. Banana, if we die today, I pulled him close, feeling partially responsible for this predicament since I was the one who had feelings for Cooper and not Banana. Please know that you were the love of my life, little friend. Cooper stood outside my door. And, Banana, I've never seen anyone wear a tie better than you, I added quickly, giving him a kiss on the top of his head and hoping this wasn't the last compliment I'd give my baby. Cooper pulled my door open and offered his hand, but I hesitated. I promise it will be worth it, he said. Don't judge a book by its cover. I squinted down the dirt road past the gate. Shadows from the tall, wild grasses stretched across the path as the sun sank lower toward the horizon. Is there a library down there? I asked, feeling momentarily hopeful. With a little reading area surrounded by trees and shrubs and covered in twinkling lights like some sort of secret garden where you will read me poetry and I will eat strawberries and sip champagne? He stared in the direction where I was looking and then drummed his fingers along the top of the car. I should have said don't judge a water tower by its rusted, tetanus lock, he said, stretching his hand closer. Just trust me. I accepted his hand and tucked Banana into my purse. Here went nothing. How do you have keys to this clearly abandoned place? I asked as we walked toward the gate together. I glanced over at Cooper when he didn't answer. Maybe he hadn't heard me. Hello? I waved a hand in front of him. Do you know the owner of this land, or something? Is that how you came by the keys for the gate? The only sound that came in response was the crunch of our shoes against the gravel. Finally, he smiled over at me sheepishly. I don't have the keys. It took a moment for his words to sink in. Wait, what? Then how will we? He grinned. I grabbed his arm and held him still, staring with wider eyes than I'd ever stared with in my entire life. Cooper, I said, my voice incredulous. Are you telling me that you're about to, I paused and held both of my arms up for dramatic effect, break the law? Are you encouraging me to break that law as well? I wouldn't put it that way, he said, and turned to walk along the chain-link fence past the gate with the rusted lock. I followed after him with Banana, wondering if I should pinch myself just to make sure this wasn't a dream. As a law-abiding, dutiful citizen, I am going to have to report you, officer, I called after him, wanting to squeal with glee at the thought of someone writing him a ticket. Maybe Cooper had a twin brother. That was the only rational explanation. Cooper must be tied up somewhere and this must be Tucker or Sawyer or Peter Hill. He was the bad boy twin. A citizen's arrest, I sang, stepping through the weeds and thoroughly enjoying the beginning of this date. I will conduct a citizen's arrest on you, officer. Please do not resist. I'm very strong and very fast. He shook his head and chuckled as he stopped and waited for me. Would you mind if I borrowed your handcuffs for my citizen's arrest? I asked, politely. Are they your size? A one-size-fits-all? You are too much, he said, lifting up a loose section of the chain-link fence and gesturing for me to duck under. I shrugged. Not like I have my own handcuffs. I'm a pet store manager, after all. One who sneaks off early before the end of her workday when coerced. Such a rebel, he said, as I wiggled through the hole in the fence and then turned to wait for him. I'm warning you, officer. Run and I will sick Banana on you, I continued, not able to stop from grinning from ear to ear. He is a vicious attack dog, despite all appearances. "I'll keep that in mind," he said, dropping the fence back into place after he crawled through. Then he scratched behind Banana's ear. Banana promptly licked his pinky, tail wagging merrily. Yeah, vicious is most certainly the word I would use to describe Banana. I smiled and Cooper grinned back at me. He placed his arm around my shoulder and led me toward the water tower. With his strong arm around me, the water tower suddenly didn't look so desolate and decrepit. Being wrapped in his embrace made it look beautiful, bathed in the late afternoon sun. Suddenly, I could hear birds singing out and the smell of wildflowers on the soft, silky breeze. The old paint on the water tower somehow seemed to shimmer with Cooper's arm around me, and the rest no longer looked boring. Okay, I definitely liked Cooper. A lot. "I'll take Banana," he said when we reached the ladder at the base of the tower. I stared up at the long climb. "We're going up there?" "That's the idea." I gaped up at him. "Sure you don't want to go get pizza instead? Or read police code books or something?" He raised a mischievous eyebrow. "If I didn't know you better, I'd say you're thinking with your head right now. Logic is definitely needed right now." I gazed back up at how high the ledge of the water tower sat at the top of the ladder. Maybe logic is ruling my brain because I don't want to fall and bust my head open on our third date. He laughed. "You'll be fine." In the end, it only took a few girlish squeals and a couple bursts of "I'm going to die" before I safely reached the top. Feeling steady on the ledge, I went to kiss it before realizing how dirty it must be. I settled on closing my eyes and leaning against the water tower with a contented sigh. Cooper climbed up after me and crawled my way until he was seated beside me. I felt his shoulder against mine and he set his hand on my leg. "Open your eyes." "No way," I said, shaking my head profusely. That was a firm no, Captain. A solid thanks, but no thanks. A not in a million years, no way Jose, and an over my dead body. "Abigail," Cooper traced his thumb in small, comforting circles on my leg. "Open your eyes and take in the view." Cracking just one eye open, I studied him through the narrow slit. He nodded toward the edge of the railing. Taking a deep inhale and letting a shaky exhale out, I opened both my eyes. Oh, wow. The view of Sacramento spread out before us, over the river with its golden glints shining from the last rays of sunlight. Brilliant hues of pink and orange and yellow bathed the big, wide sky that seemed to stretch on forever. And there was nobody around but us. To think I'd hoped we were going to a library. This place is amazing. My voice was nearly a whisper. I turned to Cooper and found him smiling in the same way I was. But Cooper wasn't admiring the view from the water tower. He was looking at me. We stared into each other's eyes and I, too, somehow forgot about the stunning view just a head's turn away. "How did you find this place?" He turned away, leaning his head back against the water tower as he looked out over the river. "I haven't been here in years," he said, glancing at me out of the corner of his eye. "I used to come here all of the time as a kid, though." The image of Cooper as a child made me smile. "How many tickets did you give the neighborhood kids for riding their tricycles too fast?" "I'll bet you were great at Simon Says." Cooper laughed, but there was a weight in his laughter I couldn't read. It wasn't carefree and his smile didn't reach his eyes. Then he looked down. "I don't think you would have recognized me back when I was a kid. I was very different than I am now." My eyebrows came together. "How so?" He opened his mouth as if about to say something, but then he hesitated and then laughed, shaking his head. "What?" I asked. "Nothing. Tell me." I elbowed him playfully in the side, jostling Banana from his nap on Cooper's lap. "Come on," I insisted. I know you were going to say something, so just spit it out. He stared up at the top of the water tower. Back then, I was actually more like you. Me? I pointed to my chest because I just couldn't believe it. Cooper used to be like me? I know, he said, watching as Banana circled around to find another comfy spot. It's hard to believe, but it's true. I lived life to the fullest. I was adventurous and reckless. Hey. And wild. Hey. And crazy. I'm not crazy. Cooper looked me straight in the eye and raised his eyebrow. Shall we pull up your presentation again and your title that's a novel long? Huh. He made a fair point. Fine, I mumbled. There's nothing wrong with a little crazy. Like I said, he continued. I was crazy, too. But I'm different now. Again I sensed that invisible weight that seemed to drag down his head and slump his shoulders and shadow his soul. He fidgeted with a stray thread on a button of his perfectly pressed, as always, shirt. I doubt he'd known it was there when he left his house, or he would have trimmed it with his tiny scissors that were probably labeled thread trimming scissors from his drawer labeled various scissors. Just a wild guess. Abigail, he said after a moment of silence. I know we had a bit of a rocky start, and I know how I can come across sometimes. At times, I can appear to be a little rigid, he said, right as I said, robotic. He smiled. Yes, maybe a bit robotic. A bit, I said with a smile of my own. I was afraid to admit that maybe, just maybe I had come to like everything about him, including his robot side. Every bit of him was Cooper, and I seemed to be growing kind of attached to him. He watched my reaction as he moved his hand closer to mine. Our fingers interlaced, and I liked the feeling of it. I liked it very much. I brought you here because I wanted you to see, he said, pausing for a moment, and I could sense him trying to figure out how to say what he wanted to say. Because I want you to see more of me than just the robotic side. I frowned, slightly confused by what he meant. More of you? He shifted uncomfortably and then squeezed my hand. Just give me a little bit of time to explain, okay? Nodding, I rested my head on his shoulder and looked back out over the scenic view that stretched out below. His chest rose as he sucked in a deep breath. In high school, I had a friend who was like a brother to me, Harrison James. This was our spot, this water tower. Oh, I squeezed his hand, not wanting to interrupt him. He shifted again and was quiet, while I tried to wait as patiently as I could. I understood that this was difficult for him, opening up. I wasn't sure what he wanted to tell me, but I was sure I wanted to listen. Finally, after another deep breath that I felt the rise and fall of against my cheek, he continued. You may not believe me, but Harrison and I used to bring beer up here. Beer we'd bought with my fake ID. Cooper was right. I didn't believe him. At all. We'd sneak in and climb up here and drink and listen to music, sometimes until the sun came up behind us. His head shifted and I felt him smiling down at me. Or until some no-fun cop came and ran us off. I laughed softly. Aren't they the worst? The worst, he agreed, rubbing circles along the top of my hand with his thumb. I thought I could sense a tremor in his fingers. Any rule out there, I wanted to break. I rebelled against my teachers, my parents, and my counselors. The principal knew me by name, and it wasn't because I was on the honor roll. I spent more time in his office than I ever did in biology. It's hard to picture you like that, I said, shaking my head. No, I couldn't imagine this Cooper. Had he worn his hair shaggy and unruly? Had he worn band t-shirts and partied under the bleachers after school? I felt like I was hearing about a person I didn't know, a person entirely separate from the responsible, organized man I was leaning against. I thought I was a cool rebel, he said, shaking his head. I thought I was living life to the fullest and that fences and responsibilities were chains holding me back. Harrison was my partner in crime, through thick and thin. My best friend. I heard Cooper swallow and wanted to turn to see his face, but I remained still so I wouldn't disrupt his confession, because that was exactly what this felt like, a confession. So, I kept my hand in his and my head on his shoulder. What changed? I asked. It was our senior year and we were both 17, he said, his voice almost too quiet for me to hear. There was a rock concert just outside of Sacramento that we wanted to go to. But both of our parents had said no, of course. Harrison thought that missing the concert would be the end of the world, so I insisted we still go. I said we had to go. I said we were going to regret it if we didn't. I said we had to live wild and free. And I convinced him to go out that night. Chills crept up my spine. I waited. I snuck out of my parents' house with the keys to my dad's car and then drove over and picked up Harrison from his house. He fell into the bushes beneath his bedroom window and we laughed about it all the way to the concert. The night was everything I'd hoped it would be. We'd had a blast. It was all perfect until a drunk driver ran a stop sign and struck our car a block from Harrison's home. He died upon impact. I stopped breathing. Harrison had died that night. I got a scratch on my forehead and a settlement. A lump formed in my throat the size of a boulder. I understood. I understood what Cooper wanted to share with me. I understood then what he meant when he said he wanted me to see more of him. He was more than just a cop, more than just a rule follower, more than just a robot. He had a story behind that facade. I'd made the mistake of viewing him as if he saw the world as just black and white. But he was more than that. He had shades of gray. And even more than that, he had shades of color. He was kind and caring and thoughtful and fun. He'd made mistakes and had regrets and had dealt with pain and hurt and heartache. It was hard to know what to say when someone tells you a story like his. There never seems to be words that do what they should. No sentiment ever feels perfect. So I watched the sunset and rested my head against Cooper and thought about what I should say to him. I see you, Cooper, I said, nuzzling my cheek against his shoulder. I see you. I knew my words didn't say everything I wanted to say, but he squeezed my hand and leaned his head against mine, and I knew I had said enough. Chapter 7. Today was the day. Today was the day it would all be decided. Today was the day the committee would vote. But first I had to give my presentation. And before I had to present, I felt pretty sure I had to hurl. And before I had to hurl, I had to get an appetite, so I had something in my stomach to hurl. The problem was that I kept pushing away everything Hannah tried to force feed me. Abigail, she said, putting her hands on her hips. You have to eat something or you'll pass out up there during your presentation. Hannah dangled a chocolate chip muffin in front of my face, half like a mysterious talisman in an attempt to hypnotize me to eat and half like a dog treat I'd used to get Banana to obey. I'm too nervous to eat, I told her, biting my nails and glancing around the conference room at City Hall that was filling steadily with men and women wearing serious black suits and even more serious frowns. After my date with Cooper at the water tower, something had changed inside me. He and I talked on the phone every day, met for coffee, and I couldn't imagine my life any other way. But now it was the following Monday and I had to go in front of the committee for my one shot to save Reagan's rescue at the barn. I was beyond petrified. I'm sorry, Hannah, I just can't eat. Too much is riding on all of this. Regardless of my declaration, I ate the chocolate chip muffin with interest, pondering whether or not they were semi-sweet chocolate chips. I started to reach for the muffin as Hannah grinned, but the sudden churn in my stomach stopped my hand and I groaned. "Hannah, go up there for me," I said, shoving my note cards at her with sweaty fingers. "Please, please, please?" "Thanks, I love you. You're the best. Dream on, girl." She laughed, bit into the muffin and raised her eyebrows. "If you love me, then you should present for my boss." "Touché," I grumbled. In my short law school career, I'd presented in front of large audiences periodically. It was kind of part of the job. But I never had a problem shoving chocolate chip muffin after chocolate chip muffin into my mouth beforehand. I knew why this time felt so different. I cared. I cared about the dogs these funds could save. I cared about my friend these funds could help. I cared about doing something I believed in mind, body, and soul. I hadn't cared in law school, which was the reason I'd left. It was the reason I moved across the country, started a new career path, and became a different woman. It was the reason I changed my last name. Shoot, I thought, I still needed to change that on my license. That lingering task distracted me briefly from my crushing nervousness. The anxiety had just started to sneak back in when I noticed Cooper enter the room. His eyes searched the growing crowd and it made my heart flutter because I knew exactly who he was looking for, me. A smile stretched across his face and his eyes lit up when he saw me and I gave him a smile that rivaled his. Then he pointed to the door on the opposite side of the conference room. I assured Hannah I'd be right back and she gave me a wink. "Go flirt the good flirt," she called after and dramatically thumped her forehead. Silly me, I meant go fight the good fight. I whirled around with heated cheeks. "Hannah!" She shrugged. "Whatever works." Judging by the grin she couldn't contain, she was far from sorry. I shook my head and weaved through the crowd to slip out into the quiet, empty hall where I found Cooper leaning against the wall. He looked up when the sharp clack of my heels hit the marble floor. "Nervous?" he asked as he took my hands in his. "No," I lied. "Not at all." "No, sir." "Nervous?" "Me? How could I? I mean, why would I? I'm not nervous." "You're nervous." He laughed and squeezed my hands as my nervous sputtering died off. "I shouldn't be nervous," I said, shaking my head. "I'm good at this kind of stuff. At least I used to be. In law school I was." "Law school?" He stared at me like I'd just spoken Japanese. I smiled, loving that I continued to surprise him. "Yes, law school," I said, pulling my shoulders back and standing up straighter. "Yours truly is a proud law school dropout." I just, law school?" It was Cooper's turn to sputter. "Abigail Apple? Law? Rules and laws and rules and statutes and order and rules and—" "I think you might have said rules already. And gavels and codes and rules." I shrugged. "You aren't the only one who used to be different." He'd opened up to me last week, which had brought us closer together. I knew that had been a big step for him, a painful, honest, big step. And as I looked up into his eyes, I knew I had to take that same step for him. I wanted him to see all of me. Not just the me I was now. Because just like Cooper, I wouldn't be the woman I was at this very moment in this hallway without having been the woman I used to be in that law school all those years before. If I wanted Cooper to be my future, I needed to show him my past. "Both of my parents were lawyers," I said, sucking in a deep breath. Successful, stern, serious lawyers who expected their daughter to become a successful, stern, serious lawyer. "The presentation at the police station," he said, realization written in his eyes. "Residual parental influence?" You can take the girl out of law school, but you can't take the controlling, demanding, strict parents out of the girl. He chuckled at my lame joke. I grew up doing what was expected of me. Taking advanced classes, after-school debate clubs, and internships at the local courthouse. My stomach knotted as I mentally relived the misery of not being me. I majored in English in college because my parents wanted me to. I agreed without even thinking about whether I wanted to major in English or not. I applied to law school without thinking about it, too. I attended classes without thinking about it. I went day to day on autopilot without thinking about whether these choices were making me happy. Without thinking whether I was doing any good for anyone else. Without thinking whether this was what I wanted deep down in my heart. So what changed? He asked, still stroking his thumb against my hand. You're going to laugh, I responded, dropping my gaze from his. Then we'll laugh together. I looked up at him. He was right. What was wrong with laughter? I was in a park reading a book about tax law and an apple fell on my head, I said, remembering back to that day. I waited for Cooper's response. He was silent for a moment, but then I noticed his chest hitch. The smallest chuckle escaped his lips and the sound made me laugh. He laughed at my laughter and I laughed at his, and soon we were alone in the hallway laughing so hard we each had tears in our eyes and were holding our sides. I changed my whole life because an apple fell on my head, I managed to squeak out through nearly hysterical laughter. An apple. He sucked in a breath and leaned back, wiping at his eyes. Abigail Apple, he said, wheezing a little. I've never been so grateful for a fruit in my entire life. I stopped laughing as he smiled down at me. Every apple one see now, I am going to stop and kiss, he continued. Every farmer at the market is going to have to shoo me away from his pickings, and every grocery store is going to have to ban me, and every worker at every orchard is going to have to put up higher fences to keep me away, because I am going to kiss each and every apple one find. Tears pooled in my eyes again, not from my previously uncontrollable laughter but for a whole other reason. Kissing apples is against the rules, I said softly. His eyes didn't leave mine when he said, just as softly, I know. I smiled. But I have an apple, of all things, to thank for you being in my life, he said, giving me the most adoring look I'd ever seen. Those dogs at the rescue have an apple to thank. Your friends have an apple to thank. So I'll break a rule or two for an apple. Those dogs have more than just me to thank, I said, nudging him playfully with my shoulder. They have you, too. They have a speeding ticket and a bad first date and a very good second date to thank as well. He smiled just as someone from inside the conference room announced over the buzz of the crowd that the presentations would begin in 2 minutes. My stomach flipped. Abigail, I want you to know something, he said, seeming to notice my discomfort. You're going to do a great job up there at the podium. I have no doubt. I nodded. All my spreadsheets are ready and I triple-checked the projections again last night. The numbers are all there. Abigail. I redid the cost analysis to make it more convincing to the board, but maybe I should have included inflation. I didn't include inflation. Why didn't I include? Abigail. My breakdown of the costs of the farm should be accurate. Utilities and yearly dog food consumption and upkeep of fences and pens and... Abigail. Are pie charts too cutesy? I asked, my mind whirling as I babbled. I was out of time, and if I weren't completely prepared then I'd let everyone down. Cooper, Reagan, and the dogs. I should have done more. I should have worked harder. I should have used a bar chart. Everyone knows a bar chart is more professional. What was I thinking? A pie chart? A pie chart? Apple! I opened my mouth to continue, but Cooper suddenly flicked the top of my head. I stared up at him incredulously since he had just flicked me. I rubbed the spot. "Ow," I said, frowning at the grin on his face and pouting more petulantly than I intended. I crossed my arms and started tapping my toe. "What in the world was that for?" "Just a reminder," he said, and then leaned over and pressed a gentle kiss to that same spot on my head. I could only stare in shock as he pulled back and smiled down at me. He brushed a short strand of hair away from my forehead with the softest touch that made goosebumps travel up my spine. "A reminder that you're Abigail Apple now. So be Abigail Apple. She's pretty amazing." My stomach nodded. "But so much is riding on me. I promise you those dogs will not lose their home, all right?" He cupped both of my cheeks with his palms. "I will not let that happen, so stop worrying. I've never seen you like this." I nodded. It was all I could do. "Just be yourself up there," he said, glancing toward the door to the conference room when the booming voice asked everyone to take their seats. "Be Abigail Apple." His hand slipped away and I leaned toward him just as he shifted past me like a warm summer wind. I nearly tumbled over, I'd leaned so far. My purse slipped from my shoulder and the contents scattered across the marble floor. Shaking my head and laughing at myself, I bent down to gather everything. There were the little things, lip glosses and concealer and tissues and a stray bobby pin and a grocery list from 6 months ago. There was Banana's tie from my presentation to Cooper at the police station. There was obviously my wallet and keys and cell phone. But there was also my USB flash drive. And it was my USB flash drive, the one holding my meticulously written, exhaustively researched, agonizingly analyzed presentation for the charity committee that I found myself staring at for the longest time there in the empty hallway as I pondered what Cooper had said to me before he went back inside, "Be Abigail Apple." I stared at the USB flash drive that held my presentation and found myself pondering why, really why, I hadn't yet changed my name on my driver's license. I told myself time and time again that I didn't have time with my job and volunteering. I told myself it was because the DMV was an experience worse than any other on earth. But maybe it was because I hadn't yet fully embraced Abigail Apple. And maybe today was the day I would. After Cooper's encouragement, maybe today was the day that I'd finally become brave enough. Now I knew what I needed to do. With a smile on my face, I grabbed the USB flash drive and marched straight to the nearest trash bin. I hurled it in and sent my law school heels tumbling in right after it. Barefoot and brave, I rummaged for my cell phone and dialed Reagan's number. "Abigail," she answered, breathless. "I'm leaving right now. Sorry, I'm running late." There was an incident involving 2 puppies and a now headless chew toy. "But Did you say you haven't left yet?" I asked. "No, I'm so sorry. I'll be there before you present, I promise." "Leaving now." I grinned. "No problem. I'm glad you're running late. Sorry about the beheaded toy, though." "Huh? Don't leave yet." There was a pause on the other line. "Why not?" "Because I have a plan," I said, excitement coursing through my veins. I no longer felt an ounce of nervousness. I was Abigail Apple. And I knew what to do. Chapter 8. In my 30-minute presentation to the committee who would decide which local charity would receive the $100,000 donation, I would not utter a single number. Not one pie chart would be shown. There would be no spreadsheet in sight. There would be, however, an abundance of puppies. Well, if they arrived in the next 3 minutes. I stood in the hallway, pacing back and forth on my bare feet just 3 minutes before my assigned time slot, and trying not to watch the second hand of the clock on the wall tick forward when I heard the first bark. I raced to the top of the stairs and was nearly knocked over by a rush of puppies and dogs. After regaining my balance, my gaze shot to Reagan and Krista and Hannah being yanked along by the leashes behind our furry friends. Then I knelt amongst the flurry of wet kisses and shedding hair as my friends bent over their knees, huffing and puffing. "Are we too late?" Reagan asked between gulps of air. As if in answer, the door to the conference room opened and a woman leaned her head out. "Abigail Apple, you're up," the woman said. I winked at Reagan. "You're right on time." When I entered the conference room, the woman whispered, "The laptop is set up for you with the projector. You just have to put in your USB flash drive and you're good to go." I smiled and nodded. But when I got to the front of the room and stood before the 13 people on the committee and the interested public seated behind them, I clicked off the projector. From the side of the room, the woman waved her hands. "No, you need to keep that on so you can use it for the presentation." I leaned toward her. "I'm going to do something dramatic here instead. Don't worry." She held up her hands as if to say, "Do what you want, but don't say I didn't warn you." I turned to my audience and caught Cooper looking at me. "Ladies and gentlemen," I started, standing with my hands folded in front of me. "I had a presentation prepared for you today because I wanted to convince your minds that Rescue at the Barn is where the charity drive funds should be donated." I waved to Reagan, who was waiting at the door to the conference room. But I was reminded by someone very dear to me that the heart is just as important. So here goes. And for the next 30 minutes I shared my personal experience with Reagan's rescue at the barn while the dogs sat on the laps of committee members, curled up beneath their chairs, and sitting beside them occasionally getting an ear scratch or a belly rub. I spoke openly and honestly about the impact volunteering there had made on my life. I pointed out Banana and the joy he'd brought me as he licked at Cooper's ear. And I explained the need for pet rescues. I let the dogs do the rest of the convincing. At the end of my presentation, I helped Reagan and Krista and Hannah and a few kind audience members wrangle up the dogs, and then we passed out lint rollers to all of the committee members so they could remove the dog hair from their business suits. As head of the committee, Cooper stood up at the front of the conference room and announced that since I was the last to present, they would now deliberate and later return to announce a winner of the $100,000. As he filed out with the other 12 members, he caught my eye amongst the chaos of 20 hungry puppies and winked. I knew I had done it. I knew Rescue at the Barn was safe. I knew how the committee would vote. So after 10 minutes of relieving dog bladders and corralling the dogs into the park behind City Hall, I returned to the conference room with confidence in my heart. When the committee filed back in and took their seats, I didn't feel nervous or anxious or worried in the slightest. And as Cooper stood up, holding a giant check turned backwards to hide the winner's name, I had nothing to fear, because I already knew the words that were going to come from his perfect mouth that I found myself wanting to kiss. "This was a very difficult decision," Cooper started. I nodded, thinking that of course he had to say that. "Trust me when we say that we wish we could give the $100,000 donation to each and every one of the charities which presented today. They are all deserving, and this just shows us how much more work we have to do as a city." I nodded again, ready for him to say what I already knew. "But we had to choose just one charity for this donation, and we are very happy to announce," he paused, but I was already moving toward the front of the room when he said, "The charity which will be receiving the donation from the city of Sacramento is," this was it. This was the moment. Founding Friendships. I stopped mid-stride and blinked. Wait. What? Then I watched Jill Parnell, director of Founding Friendships, a homeless outreach nonprofit organization, stand and stride toward Cooper in her designer suit and high heels as the audience applauded. I tried to catch Cooper's eye, but he faced the director as he shook her hand and passed over the giant check that Reagan's sweet dogs so desperately needed. I squinted to read the name on the check, hoping that would clear things up. Surely, The check must say rescue at the barn, but Cooper must have gotten nervous and announced the wrong charity. Hey, if it can happen at the Oscars, then it can happen at Sacramento City Hall. I squinted and squinted, but no matter how much I squinted, the check still read the same: Founding Friendships. Founding Friendships, not rescue at the barn. My stomach roiled and my purse buzzed, so I fished out my cell phone and tried not to hurl. My cell screen displayed a text message from Reagan, who was still outside with Krista and Hannah taking care of the dogs. We heard the cheering. Did we win? Are the dogs saved? My heart sank. How could I tell her that I'd failed her? How could I write back that the dogs would have nowhere to go when her rescue shut down? How could I possibly say how sorry I was? This wasn't supposed to happen. Everyone around me was happy and I didn't understand why. This wasn't right. This wasn't right at all. Didn't they wonder where the dogs at rescue at the barn were going to go when it closed down? Did they wonder how the dogs were going to get their next meal, their next grooming, and their next walk? Didn't they care that the dogs stay alive? The people in the room must have had answers that I didn't, because from where I was standing there was no reason at all to be happy. We want to thank everyone for coming out today, the mayor said from the podium as everyone quieted for him. We are very proud of the work this committee has done, and especially its dedicated, hard-working committee head, Officer Cooper Hill. I clapped numbly, unsure of what else to do. It felt like my body was not my own. I was supposed to be holding a check for rescue at the barn right now. And since I wasn't, I hardly knew what to do with myself. It was all I could do not to break down and cry. From my understanding, the vote came down to a tiebreaker, the mayor continued. So great job to all of the charities for helping the community. We'll see you next year. A tiebreaker? I spotted Cooper in the crowd. He was still speaking with the director of Founding Friendships, who was talking animatedly to him. Just like everyone else in the room, he looked happy. My head crooked to the side as I stared at him. A tiebreaker. The pieces were all there, but my mind was unwilling to put them all together. The picture from the scattered puzzle was so clear, so obvious, so unavoidable, and yet I didn't want to see it. Because that would mean Cooper had been the deciding vote. It would mean that Cooper, my Cooper, was the one who had voted for Founding Friendships over rescue at the barn. It meant that Cooper had lied to me when he'd said those dogs wouldn't lose their home. At that moment, he turned toward me, catching my gaze. Then his smile dropped. I felt tears sting my eyes, and then I ran as fast as I could from the room. Down the stairs I flew, anxious to get out of there, to get far away from City Hall, and away from him. People stared in concern as I hurried past them, swiping at my eyes, but I just kept running in my bare feet. I shoved the doors to City Hall open and was halfway down the stairs when I heard Cooper call my name. I ignored him. Abigail, he called again. I would have kept hurrying away, but he caught up to me and put a gentle hand on my arm. He turned me around, even as I tried to hide my tears. Abigail, please just. Were you the one involved in the tiebreaker? I asked, anger quickly replacing my hurt. It turned out the tears kept coming regardless of which emotion took lead. Were you the deciding vote in the committee? I asked. I waited, hoping against hope that he had an explanation. I wanted him to say that he'd voted for rescue at the barn. I willed him to say that there was some misunderstanding, some silly miscommunication. I waited and I hoped, but deep down I knew the answer. He sighed and reached for my hand. I pulled it away and crossed my arms. Just tell me. He raked his fingers through his hair. Yes. I voted for Founding Friendships. Well, there it was, unavoidable and heartbreaking. You said you were going to vote for rescue at the barn, I said, trying to hide the desperation in my voice. You said all I had to do was be myself. That's not what I meant, he said, his brow wrinkling. Just listen for 2 seconds and I'll explain, okay? What's to explain? I asked, bringing my fist to my chest. I wanted to be mad. I'd rather be mad than focus on how badly I'd been hurt and betrayed. I felt stupid, so incredibly stupid for believing him. Abigail, I never said I would vote for rescue at the. I can't believe I thought you were different. I said, throwing my hands in the air. He paused and then narrowed his eyes. What does that mean? Emotion boiled inside me and I couldn't stand still anymore. Instead, I paced back and forth on the landing as he came down the last step and stood in front of me. I thought you had changed, I said, my voice in danger of reaching a level only Reagan's dogs behind City Hall could hear. I thought you'd realized you can't always think with your head and that you had a heart. I thought you were more than just a robot. He flinched at the words, which clearly had stung a deeper part of him than I'd intended. I was hurt, but I didn't want to hurt him in return. I opened my mouth to apologize when I heard Banana's distinct playful bark. He was with Reagan and the other dogs in the small park behind City Hall. I heard it again and the pain flooded over me as I thought about what would happen to the very friends he was playing with right now. What if that were Banana? I imagined the furry little love of my life in a cold, metal cage on a concrete floor. I pictured him shivering and alone and stuck inside all day. I saw him in an alternate life where Reagan's rescue at the barn didn't exist and there was no farm and no rolling hills and no warm sunshine and cool shade and fresh water from the creek. Banana was safe with me. He would always be safe with me. But the other dogs? That alternate life I pictured would soon be their lives. That alternate life was now their reality. And when I looked up at Cooper and thought about how easily he could have changed their fate, I couldn't find the strength in my heart to apologize. Founding friendships wouldn't have closed without that donation, I said, my voice defeated and sad. Rescue at the barn will have to, though. But you don't care about that, even after being there with all of those dogs. You still don't care enough. Abigail. No, I interrupted, holding my palm up. Please, don't say anything else. I can't hear any more about this. It's done. It's over. He opened his mouth, but then stopped. What's over? I don't think we can be together anymore, I said, feeling my heart crack for the second time today. I crossed my hand over my chest. I know I think with my heart and I know that it gets me into trouble sometimes. I know it can make me hold on to things too tightly and love too strongly and fight too stubbornly. I know it means my emotions run wild. I sucked in a deep breath as he waited, watching me with those blue eyes. A salty tang invaded my mouth as I tasted one of my own tears. They were falling freely and I was pretty sure my nose was running, too. But feeling everything so strongly also means I want to connect with someone heart to heart, I continued, sucking in a shaky breath. I want to share my heart with someone who is able to share their heart with me. His face paled and he stood like a statue. But I knew he'd heard me. And after today, well, I sighed, shaking my head. I don't think you're capable of that. I'm sorry, but I have to go now. Without another word, I turned and continued down the stairs and exited City Hall. I was still barefoot after throwing away my heels, but I didn't care. Down the sidewalk I walked, ignoring the often confused, often concerned stares of pedestrians passing me by on the sidewalk. I had somewhere to go and I just didn't care who saw me like this. When I entered the office, it was busy, of course it was. I knew it would be. But I grabbed a ticket, sat down, and then waited and waited and waited. I breathed in the musty smell and kept on waiting. Today had not gone the way I wanted. It most certainly did not go the way I'd expected. I'd expected to be drinking a celebratory piña colada with Reagan, Krista, and Hannah. And Cooper, too. I'd expected to be walking to the bank with that ridiculously large check, hoping a gust of wind didn't carry me away. I'd expected to go with Reagan to her landlord and hand over the money she needed for a down payment on the farm. I'd expected Cooper to go there with us. I'd expected happiness and joy and laughter this evening. But most of all, I'd expected happiness and joy and laughter with Cooper. That didn't happen. But there was one thing I gained from today. I knew who I was and who I wanted to be. Yes, it hurts sometimes to feel so deeply, to care so much, to think with your beating, aching heart. But I never wanted to stop being me because it was hard. I never wanted to be the old Abigail, just passing through life. I wanted to be Abigail Apple. Finally, my number was called and I made my way through the waiting crowd to the desk. "How can I help you?" the man asked. I slid my driver's license across the desk. "I need to update my last name, please." Chapter 9. 3 weeks later, I still cried when I thought about rescue at the barn closing. I spent more money on tissue boxes than I had in years. I looked like I'd just completed a 1,000-mile dog sled race in the Arctic. Seriously. Poor Banana. Every time I cried, he curled up beside me and licked my tears, and that much salt just can't be healthy for such a little dog. How was he supposed to fit into his cute little sweaters for fall if he was so bloated? But a hole still remained in my heart. And I wasn't entirely sure that it was solely because of the closing of Reagan's dog rescue. Something else was missing. Someone else was missing. Not that I would admit it. Today wasn't about a broken heart, though. I just needed to grab coffee before driving out to Reagan's rescue at the barn. Well, not that it would be Reagan's dog rescue any longer, since the property had been sold and she needed my help to pack everything up. The dogs would soon be stuffed into my back seat to be driven to the Sacramento SPCA. "Today is the day," Courtney called out to me as I walked along the downtown sidewalk toward her coffee cart. "Hi, Courtney," I said, managing the closest thing to a smile I could muster under the circumstances as she prepared my go-to-drink order, a cinnamon dolce. "Today is the day," she repeated, raising her finger in the air with a wink. "I've got the name that would have been fabulous. No bad prom date reminders this time. You're going to love it." I knew pondering kid names she would have liked if she had a child before it was too late was some kind of therapy for Courtney, but the fact that she'd had love and lost it made me extra sad today. Although her Hawaiian shirt covered with cartoon-looking surfers perked me up little despite how determined my heart was to be miserable. "Let me hear it, Courtney," I said. "You sure you're ready for it?" I threw her a half-hearted thumbs up. This caused Courtney to pause and the end of the whipped cream pile died with a half-hearted sputter. "Abigail Apple," she said, her eyebrows lifting as she set down the drink. "You're not yourself. Talk to me." I rubbed my palm over Banana's head, holding off the threatening recurrence of tears. "I'm on my way to help Reagan shut down rescue at the barn," I said, my throat tightening. "I can't stop thinking about how unfair it is. I thought Cooper would vote to donate the money to her rescue, but he didn't. And those dogs needed him." I dropped my head, staring at my rhinestone flip-flops as if asking for toes to save me from the awfulness of it all. The scritch-scritch sounds of the whipped cream container squirting made me lift my head. Courtney's forehead wrinkled in concentration as she focused on putting as much whipped cream on my drink as was humanly possible. Double what she normally gave me. But not even whipped cream could perk me up right now. "Take this and listen," she said, handing over the drink. "You need something sweet while I give you some cold, hard reality." Why do I feel scared? I asked, licking at the whipped cream and staring at her past the white mountain of cream. I'd never heard her speak in such a serious tone. She normally seemed to be pure piña colada, so the serious and stern set of her jaw confused me. I'm going to tell you about my friend, Beth. Her brow crinkled as she rubbed a cloth over the small bit of counter space under the espresso machine. I met Beth a couple years back when I was still practicing law. It's so hard to picture you as a lawyer, I said, eyeing those cartoon-looking surfers again and wondering if they were glow-in-the-dark material. You don't know how many times I've heard that, she said, letting out a heavy sigh. This kind of happiness only comes from no longer being a lawyer. Ugh, the long hours. The late nights. The constant conflicts. I was determined to win at that game and I did quite well, but I woke up one day and my law firm was all I had. The corners of my lips turned downward. You seem happy now. You need more whipped cream. Courtney squirted more whipped cream for me and then set the can back in the mini fridge. As I was saying, I met Beth when I was a lawyer. She was in an abusive relationship and felt trapped. My stomach churned. How awful. It can be a very confusing thing when someone you love and trust starts hurting you. Self-preservation finally made Beth gain the courage to leave, but she had nowhere to go. What happened? I asked, knowing there wasn't enough whipped cream in the world for this conversation. She tilted her head and gave me a prodding look. There was a young lawyer named Jill Parnell, who was taking Sacramento by storm. Trying the toughest cases, going head-to-head with the best attorneys in town and winning. Jill Parnell. Jill Parnell. Why did that name sound so familiar? Out of a series of circumstances, one day she served breakfast to the homeless and came face to face with Beth, Courtney said, meeting my eye. They were the same age and even looked quite a bit alike. Jill said it had been like looking into a mirror. My face went numb as I remembered where I'd heard the name Jill Parnell. Do you know what saved Beth, Abigail? I shook my head, waiting for the answer. Yes, you do. Deep down, I think you know. What I knew then was why I needed the extra whipped cream. Because the taste left in my mouth was bitter. And it was all my own doing. Jill is the director of Founding Friendships. Beth is the reason Jill started Founding Friendships. Courtney nodded, giving me a sympathetic look. Jill told me she realized that under a different set of circumstances she could have been Beth. So, serving breakfast to Beth didn't feel like enough for Jill. She wanted to give Beth the opportunity to rebuild her life. Housing, counseling, job training, caring support, the whole bit. That's why Jill started the homeless outreach program. On her own? The nonprofit has grown so big now, I said, realizing it would be doing even better with the committee's generous donation. She's a very determined woman. She put together a team to form Founding Friendships and they started with helping just one person, Beth. Guess what Beth is doing now? I shook my head. Tell me. Beth is in her second year of law school. Courtney smiled as if she were beyond proud. She has a heart for representing and defending other victims of domestic violence. And she's ferocious. I hope she does a better job at balancing her hours than I did. I hope so, too, I said, feeling bad for Courtney, but impressed by Beth. But then my shoulders sagged and I hung my head. I don't begrudge Founding Friendships the donation. I just really wanted Cooper to vote for rescue at the barn to save all those dogs, who mean so much to me. Now who knows what will happen to them? Courtney reached across the cart and squeezed my forearm. In a perfect world, there would be enough money to go around. We just have to do the best we can. She paused as if pondering something. If it were a perfect world, she said, tapping her chin with her other finger, the dogs wouldn't need rescuing at all. They would all be in wonderful homes with people loving them, like the home you've made for Banana. And never-ending whipped cream, I added with a smile. I could feel Banana stirring from his mid-morning nap in my purse. But we don't live in a perfect world, Abigail, she reminded me. Sometimes hard decisions need to be made like the one Officer Hill had to make. And I'm sure he felt he was making the best choice he could under such difficult circumstances. I nodded, getting what she meant. Someone cleared his throat behind me, and when I looked up, I noticed the line now extended down the sidewalk. But Courtney stayed focused on me, making me wonder if she knew they were there. Nobody said anything though. Were they listening to Courtney's story? When I was unhappy and unfulfilled as a lawyer, she went on, I knew my heart wanted more from life, but it was terrifying to take that leap and make a change. And when Beth was faced with the hard decision about escaping her old life, she followed her heart even though she was leaping out into the great unknown. And you followed your heart and fought for the dog rescue, she said, smiling gently. Just like Cooper did by voting for founding friendships, I finished, as a light bulb switched on above my head. The words aha didn't escape from my lips and there wasn't a physical blindfold pulled from my eyes, but now I could see clearly. I asked Cooper for support with what was important to me, but I never did the same for him. Since you've obviously figured things out, I believe I'm ready for the next person in line, Courtney said, glancing over my shoulder. What will you have, sir? As Courtney filled the man's coffee order, my mind reeled. I'd accused Cooper of thinking with his head over his heart, but I should have turned that accusation on myself. If I'd stopped to think with my own head for just a moment, then I could have seen what was in Cooper's heart. Instead, I'd stomped all over it. I placed my hand over Courtney's and squeezed it just like she had just squeezed my arm. Thanks for the coffee, Courtney. Coffee is good for the soul. She winked, tamping down the espresso grounds. What about Atticus Aaron Carmichael? I tilted my head, pretending to consider it. Solid name, but Atticus reminds me of To Kill a Mockingbird, and To Kill a Mockingbird reminds me of high school, and high school reminds me of acne and gym class. I'm going to have to veto that one, Courtney. Courtney sighed and shrugged her shoulders. Can't win them all, I suppose. Hey, Courtney? I asked, waiting until she glanced up at me. It's never too late to adopt a furry friend and name him Atticus. In fact, that might be a nice name for a poodle mix I know. She paused a moment and then her face lit up even more than it had. That's the best idea I've heard all year. We'll talk later. After I nodded, she returned to her coffee as I strode down the sidewalk, cinnamon dolce in hand, and a whole new understanding in my heart. As I hurried down the sidewalk, my cell phone rang out the latest Justin Timberlake song. I glanced at the screen, noting it was Hannah. I answered as I climbed into my car so I could drive to Reagan's farm to help move the dogs. Hey, Hannah. I can't. I love public speaking, she yelled. I almost dropped the phone trying to move it away from my ear so as to not go deaf from the high-pitched squealing that followed her announcement. We obviously have a bad connection. It sounded like you said you like public speaking. No, Abigail. I love public speaking, she said and then screamed. Oh, ear damage. Love it, love it, love it. It is my most favorite thing in the entire world. In the passenger seat next to me, Banana lifted his ears and quirked his head to the side in curiosity at the inhuman sound blasting from my phone. It's Hannah, I mouthed, covering the speaker. That must have made perfect sense to Banana because he then turned to the fan in front of him and resumed licking at the fresh air, aka, the air conditioning, blowing toward him. A pang of sadness struck me when I remembered Cooper sitting there, holding my precious little baby up to the window so he could be a big dog for a moment. It hurt even more to remember the way Cooper smiled at Banana, so I pushed the mental image from my mind and focused on the road and, more importantly, my friend who was clearly having a mental breakdown. "Okay, so what exactly is going on?" I asked, as the Bluetooth finally transferred my call to car speakers so I could be hands-free. "I'm telling you, I love public speaking more than eating freshly baked chocolate chip cookies out of the oven." Blasphemy. "I love it more than wiggling my toes in the sand on a bright summer's day with the wind in my hair." Madness. "Abigail, I love it more than the feeling of a sweater when it comes right out of the dryer on a winter night. That is the best feeling in the world and everyone knows it." "You're clearly stuck in an alternate universe," I said, taking advantage of the single moment of non-yelling as Hannah was forced to suck in a shaky breath. "Public speaking is the worst and we all agreed." "What changed?" "Well, I did something absolutely crazy that you'll never believe," Hannah said, using a lower volume that was less likely to result in permanent ear damage. "I talked to my boss, Jennifer." "You talked to your boss about the public speaking she wanted you to do even though it's her job?" I chuckled as I turned onto the country road that would lead me to Reagan's rescue at the barn. "Gutsy move, Hannah." "I know," she said, and I could almost see her rolling her eyes. "It was crazy, right? But it turns out that I've been seeing things all wrong." "Do tell." "She wasn't trying to dump her work on me," Hannah explained. "She's thinking of me for this huge promotion and wanted to see if I was capable of more responsibilities." "No way." "Way." Hannah laughed. And here I thought she wanted to stick me with the terrible tasks she didn't want to do, and the whole time she had my best intentions at heart. "I mean, I can't believe it." "What was I thinking?" "You were thinking about how much you loathed public speaking," I said, glancing at Banana, who looked over at me with a look that roughly translated to "Girl, I'm trying to enjoy this ride." "Can you ask her to keep it down?" "I should have just trusted my boss," Hannah said, letting out a groan that sounded like she was in pain. "Why in the world didn't I just trust her?" I glanced up at the sky through my sunroof. Between Courtney and now Hannah, it was clear the universe was trying to pound it into my head that I should have trusted Cooper. At least that's the way it seemed to me, and I totally got it now. "I'm super happy for you, Hannah. But I'm turning into Reagan's place, so I have to run." "Oh, right. Sorry about her rescue. You know, I wish I could be there for you guys and not at work today." "I know," I said, with a sigh. "See you later." We said our goodbyes and I hung up as I pulled my car onto the little gravel lot beside the red barn and parked. I could see the dogs running in the fields, and Banana could clearly hear them since his tail started to wag vigorously. Reagan must be trying to get out all of their energy before we had to drive them to the animal shelter. I rested my forehead against my steering wheel and closed my eyes. How was I supposed to trust Cooper when he lied to me? He promised that no matter what, rescue at the barn would not be shut down, and yet his vote had ensured that it would be. How could I possibly trust a man who lied, no matter how good his reasons? A thump at my window made me jump, and I looked over to find 2 paws and a big drool of saliva dripping down my car. First of all, EW. Second of all, I wanted to cry. Oh, the emotions were coming, and they were coming fast. I grabbed Banana from my purse as my throat squeezed and stepped out of the car. The backs of my eyes burned, even in the cool breeze that swept across the farm. Encircled by wagging tails and stinky dog breath I never wanted to stop smelling, I sagged against my car and sank down to the gravel. There I cried as I tried to hug as many of the dogs as I could, a sort of doggy team hug. I wanted every lick to stay there wet and slobbery forever. Dog hair soon covered my outfit, and it just made me cry harder knowing that I'd bought a huge pack of lint rollers that I would now never need. I pulled each dog to my chest and kissed his or her head, totally ignoring the hair that was most certainly coating my tongue. My emotions easily outweighed my common sense, what little of it I'd had in the first place, for however long I remained out there against my car surrounded by the best animals to ever live. Time stood still right now in my state of misery. "Abigail?" Reagan called. With blurry vision, I craned my neck over the crowding dogs to see Reagan walking toward me from the barn. When she saw me, probably looking like a hot mess, she hurried over. "What are you doing down there?" she asked. "I can't do it, Reagan," I wailed. "I can't say goodbye to them." "We have to do something to save these dogs," I said, trying unsuccessfully to spit out a wiry hair on my tongue. "We can't just give up." "Abigail, don't you have your phone?" "Yeah, it's in the car since I was talking to Hannah." I squeezed the neck of a Great Dane mix. "Look, I know you shot the idea down the first time, but I still think we could rob a bank. There's a sale on black ski caps at the mall right now. Let's just go rob a bank, okay?" "Abigail," I called. "I'm not violent and I know you're not violent, but what about this?" I lifted Banana above the other dogs. "We go to your landlord's place and have Banana lick his toes until he relents and gives you back the farm. If we get caught, surely the police will understand," I said, immediately thinking of Cooper arriving in his uniform. "He would so give me a ticket or take me to jail if he had to, good reason or not." Reagan crossed her arms and frowned. "You're talking crazy again." "Air writing," I blurted, trying to stand up. My attempt failed quickly as I realized one of the bigger dogs was sitting happily on my lap. "We rent a plane and write in the sky, save rescue at the barn," I said, knowing for certain that it was the most brilliant idea ever thought up. "Everyone in Sacramento would see it." Reagan raised an eyebrow. "Do you know how to fly a plane?" I dismissed her with a wave of my hand. "Details, Reagan. Mere details." She rolled her eyes and waded through the dogs. It was slow-moving as they all jumped up on her. "Abigail, where is your phone?" She crawled into my car. I stretched my neck around to see her dirty boots poking out. "I don't know," I said, wondering why she needed a phone. "I guess it's in my purse." "Do you know a pilot?" "Are you calling a pilot? A bank robber for advice?" Her head popped back out of the car and she held out my phone for me to see. "I texted you earlier," she said. "Okay," I squinted at the text on my screen and then shook my head. I read the words again. I rubbed my eyes and tried reading them once more. Then I pinched myself and still it read the same. I couldn't believe it, but I wasn't dreaming and my vision wasn't failing. The text message read, "The buyer of the property just gave me the farm. Just gave it to me. Abigail, rescue at the barn isn't going anywhere. Call me." Aw. When I looked up, Reagan was standing above me with a huge grin on her face. "Really?" I asked. She nodded. "Really?" Her grin turned into a full-blown smile and my eyes watered, but this time they were happy tears. I smiled and we hugged and we jumped up and down until the most obvious question entered my mind. I pulled back and looked at Reagan. "Who would do such a thing?" I asked, and then my breath caught in my throat. There was one person who had promised me the rescue would be safe, and he really did seem like the kind of person to keep a promise. But the $100,000 donation was only enough for a down payment on the property and not enough to buy it. Plus, the check had already gone to Founding Friendships. So, how in the world had Cooper saved the rescue? Chapter 10. Well, here I was again, speeding down a country road with Banana at my side and more emotions than I knew what to do with bubbling up inside me: regret, anxiety, gratitude, happiness, joy, the ugh, why do I make a mess out of everything and anything in life emotion, and one more that I felt was nearing a certain L word. And I didn't mean lava cake. My feelings felt like waves crashing over me, and I pushed my foot down harder and harder on the pedal, thinking a slice of lava cake actually sounded good right now. But I had to get to Cooper as fast as I could. I had to get to him now, which didn't seem soon enough. I had to get to him this morning, or better yet, yesterday morning. No, I had to get to him all the way back at the moment that I'd yelled at him on the steps at City Hall. But going back in time was impossible. So I'd have to settle for as soon as I could and hope that would be soon enough. I thought back to earlier when I'd had gravel under my bottom, the warm metal of my car against my back, the dogs all around me, and Reagan's smile above me. I'd looked up at her and asked the most obvious question: who would do such a thing? Who had purchased the farm from Reagan's landlord? Who had that much money lying around? Who had gifted the property to her without wanting anything in return? Who had saved rescue at the barn? Who saved the single place on earth that mattered most to me? Who would do such a thing? I'd asked her. She looked down at me and smiled. Don't you know? Come on, Abigail. You must know who would do such a thing. Sorry, I'd said, shaking my head. I don't know any millionaires who could afford to buy that property. She crossed her arms. Apparently you know one. Who? I'd asked, wishing she'd just answered that question so we wouldn't have to go through all this nonsense. I wanted to know who I had to thank. I wanted to know who I owed my eternal gratitude to. Why wouldn't she just tell me? And then she told me. I have to go, I'd said, and hurried to my feet, searching the crowd of dogs for my tiny little banana. Oh, my goodness, Reagan, I totally have to go. Like now. Go, she cheered, helping me push back enough dogs so that I could slip inside my car and close the door. I rolled down the window as I backed up, being careful, of course, not to smush any of the dogs, sweet dogs that were now safe. Rescue at the barn had been saved by the most amazing selfless hero that had ever walked the earth, and I needed to thank him. I have to go, I shouted back to her as I waved, because my brain couldn't think of anything else at that moment. I have to go, I have to go, I so have to. Oh, wait. I don't know what I'm going to do when I find him. You'll know what to do, she answered as I reversed in a cloud of dust. I wasn't so sure I would know what to do when I got there. After leaving law school, I thought I had everything figured out. I thought I knew my path. I thought I knew what to do, because I was following my heart. Well, now I needed my heart to kindly show me how to get out of this mess I'd created. I sped closer and closer to town, cringing at the huge mess I'd made. As I drove, I practiced what I would say to Cooper when I found him. Thank goodness I was practicing verbally, because if I'd been writing all of the ideas down on paper, then my back seat would have been flooded with crumpled balls of failed apologies. Not one was good enough, and if I hadn't heard sirens wailing from behind me causing me to pause, then my metaphorical crumpled balls would have started to tumble down on Banana and me. The sirens wailed over and over, loud enough to yank me out of my potential apologies. I caught sight of the red lights in my rear-view mirror and knew this stop would eat up precious time. Okay, maybe I'd pushed my foot down a little too hard on the pedal, and maybe I'd been going a wee bit over the speed limit. But this apology was so way overdue. I had to get out of this ticket quickly so I could hurry back on my way to Cooper. Be on your best behavior, Banana, I told him as I checked myself in the mirror behind my visor. This time, I would go straight to groveling. All of this was actually starting to seem rather déjà vu, right down to the streaks of mascara and the puffy eyes from crying. I did what I could with a couple dabs of concealer and a smudge of lipstick. I rolled down the passenger window and heard a familiar voice. "Ma'am, would you please step out of your car?" he said, but the sound came from my side of the car, the driver's side. I froze. I knew that voice. I knew that voice in my heart. It was the voice that had played over and over in my dreams for the last 3 weeks. "Ma'am, if you don't mind," he repeated. "Please step out of your car." My hand shook as I reached for the door handle. But then I dropped my hand to my leg so I could wipe off the sweat. I wasn't sure my legs would hold up as I set my feet on the dirt road since they already felt like jelly and I was still sitting down. As I stood, I kept one hand on the doorframe and one on the side of the car, and then I turned toward the voice I knew so well. A uniform, a stern frown, and the kindest blue eyes ever. "Ma'am," Cooper said, putting his hands on his hips. "Do you have any idea how fast you were going?" I tightened the grip on my car, because every time I thought I could stand on my own I looked into his eyes and felt my knees buckle again. "Well, I was in a hurry," I said, surprised my voice worked. "That's no excuse to be speeding recklessly down a country road, ma'am. Rules are rules." "But I had somewhere important to be, officer." I bit my lip, resisting the urge to move closer to him. Just a step. Just a step closer and I would be satisfied. But even as I thought that, I knew I was lying to myself. I wouldn't be satisfied until I was so close to him that I couldn't move any closer. "Well, I wasn't really going to somewhere," I admitted, catching his eyes. "I was going to someone." It was like a weight lifted from my shoulders when Cooper took a step toward me. "Someone?" he asked, raising an eyebrow. I nodded. "Someone who is stubborn and pig-headed and a giant pain in my tush a lot of the time," I said, watching his face carefully. He crossed his arms. "Not sure why you'd be in a hurry to get to someone like that." I took a step closer to him. "Well, this someone is also honorable and kind and committed and selfless and the best man I've ever known, so." I gazed at Cooper and my eyes widened. How was I supposed to explain how sorry I truly was for how I'd acted at City Hall? For assuming the worst and running from him full speed when all I'd really wanted to do was fly into his arms. No more than a yard stood between us as we stared at each other. "Well, I was hurrying to find someone myself," he said, his voice softer than the slight breeze that made the wildflowers in the field across from us sway. He closed the distance between us even further and continued. "And this someone I was looking for is also a bit stubborn and maybe a little pig-headed and a pain most of the time." I felt the tiniest smile tugging up the corners of my mouth. "Doesn't sound like someone worth hurrying to find," I said. He shook his head. "I don't know anyone more worth hurrying to find than this person," he said, sounding more serious than I'd ever heard him. "Because this someone has the biggest heart of anyone ever, and this someone dives in with her whole heart without looking first. This someone is passionate and caring and loving. And when this someone messes up, it's because this someone is feeling more than anyone I know." Tears started to pool in my eyes, and the thought crossed my mind that at this rate I needed to start investing in some industrial-strength waterproof mascara. "Are you going to give me a ticket, officer?" I asked, taking a step closer. "I don't see how I can, ma'am," he said, taking another step. There was only one step more to take and I took it, keeping my eyes on his. "Because, Abigail Apple, I was speeding just as quickly as you were trying to find you," he said. There was no more space between our feet. When he reached for me, there was no more space between our hands. Then he leaned down and there was no more space between our lips. The kiss was like sunshine on the farm he just saved, gentle and soft and warm. He pulled back slightly and I almost fell forward into him. "Abigail," he whispered. "Yeah. Is that dog hair on your cheek?" I opened my mouth to apologize, but then I realized something beautiful. Cooper loved me for all of me, dog hair included. I grinned and nodded. He smiled, shook his head, and without another word pressed his mouth to mine. As I melted into him, wanting to savor this moment and never have it end, I had quite a dilemma. I needed to say the words that were pressing on my heart, but I also needed to not break the kiss because I never ever wanted to break that kiss as long as I lived. So I made an attempt to have my cake and eat it too and said the words against Cooper's lips. "What?" he mumbled right back. "Commissary," I managed as he slipped an arm around me and I sighed. He pulled away slightly and looked down at me. "Commissary?" Covering my face with my hands, I said the words again. Yet they came out just as muffled in my little cocoon. Suddenly, his strong hands wove gently around my wrists as he lifted my hands away from my face. "Abigail, what are you saying?" I felt my cheeks warm. "I'm sorry." He smiled down at me. "Oh. I'm sorry," I said again. "I'm so sorry that they need to invent a new depth for the word sorry." He moved back to lean against my car and brought me with him. We stood side by side and watched the wildflowers dance under the golden rays. "I don't accept your apology," he said, staring straight ahead even when I turned in surprise to look at him. But he could only keep his signature stern face for a moment before turning to me with another smile and slipping his hand around mine. "Abigail, you have nothing to apologize for. You haven't disappointed me. In fact, you've given me a gift that I can never repay." "I have?" I asked, blinking and wondering when I'd done that. He nodded. "After Harrison's death, I tried so hard to be the exact opposite of who I had been when I'd acted irresponsibly and it had cost Harrison his life. I wanted to follow every single rule and never let my heart sway from what my head knew was right. And it helped me heal, but it also cut me off from other people and from forming meaningful connections with a certain someone." I squeezed his hand and smiled up at him. "You made me want to open my heart up fully again," he said, his voice soft and low. "And you, Abigail Apple, have given me the courage to finally do that." I leaned my head against his shoulder and thought I could be content staying right there for the rest of my life when a bark from the car startled the birds in the trees above us and made Cooper and me jump. "Someone feels left out," he said, chuckling as he slipped past me and leaned across the driver's seat in my car. Then he emerged with Banana held securely in his hand. Banana squirmed merrily and licked at Cooper's thumb. "I do have one more question," I said, watching as he scratched behind Banana's ear. "Shoot. Please don't take this the wrong way, but how exactly did you raise the money to buy Reagan's farm from her landlord?" "She said it cost $1 million. He kept his eyes on mine. "After Harrison died, I received an insurance settlement. I wanted to take the whole lump sum out in cash and burn it because it felt wrong to be compensated in that way because nothing would ever take away the grief that driver caused. I wanted nothing to do with that money. I never wanted to see it, never wanted to spend it, never wanted to think about it. So I left it in the bank." Emotion choked his voice, but he cleared his throat and continued. "I ripped up the statements I received each year about how much interest the savings was accumulating. I felt that if I spent that money it meant that I was moving on, moving forward, and continuing with life, which didn't seem fair without Harrison." Sadness etched lines in his face, but when he looked over at me there was a sad smile, too. And I knew it meant that everything was going to be all right. "When you and I were up on that water tower together," he said, squeezing my hand, "I couldn't help thinking that Harrison would have loved you. And I couldn't help thinking that he would have knocked me upside the head for keeping you at a distance from my heart. And I knew in that moment just how he would have wanted that money spent." "Rescue at the barn," I said, stating the obvious. "That's why you promised me the dog rescue wouldn't close down." He nodded. "I believed founding friendships needed the city, but I knew rescue at the barn needed me. So, I voted the way I had to. I trusted my heart and then I didn't trust mine and walked away," I answered for him, shaking my head. "We need a do-over." Cooper nodded. It's time we give our hearts a second chance. What is yours telling you right now? I cupped my ear and leaned my head toward my chest. I think it's saying that you should most definitely kiss me again. He laughed. Is that so? I nodded. No doubt that's what it said. Cooper cupped my cheeks and brushed his lips against mine. I felt my chest seize up. If I was having a heart attack, then I figured there were worse ways to go. We'd better listen to your heart, he whispered, pressing his mouth to each side of my lips before kissing me fully again. And I have to say that I never knew robots could kiss so well. But this one was special. Maybe this one was special because his heart was rare and true. Maybe this one was special because this robot was mine. Epilogue. 3 months later, the oranges and yellows and reds of the leaves on Reagan's farm burst with excitement to the point where there was no need to buy balloons for the celebration. The sky painted itself the most gorgeous blue for this special occasion, and the wind whispered in gleeful anticipation through the trees and the wild, golden grasses. The shining furs of the dogs were cleaned and brushed, and each was wearing a bow, because this would be a day for all of us to remember. Banana hurried to keep up with me as I darted this way and that, making sure that every last detail was in place for the grand opening of the new and improved and expanded and emancipated dog rescue thanks to Cooper's generosity. I heard Banana's little pants as I weaved through the crowd that had come out to celebrate. Abigail! Hannah called. I whirled around, careful not to step on my little man, and found Hannah pushing her way through the crowd. Hey! You. Thanks for coming, I said, pulling her into a hug. I actually can't stay too long, she said, squeezing me tight. I have to be back at the office this afternoon. But I wanted to give you this. I took the white envelope from her and raised my eyebrow. What is this? Hannah grinned. Just a little donation for the rescue. Tears started to well up in my eyes, and she rolled her eyes. Must you get emotional about everything, Abigail? I stuck out my bottom lip. I don't get emotional about everything, I lied. She crossed her arms. Did you or did you not cry at that baby shampoo commercial last night? But the baby and the puppy and the... I couldn't say any more without crying, so I just pulled Hannah in for another hug. Love you, Hannah. I'm proud of you, she said, giving me a squeeze. Hannah, a woman wearing a sharp black suit, called as she marched toward us while somehow managing both to smile at Hannah and text like her life depended on it. Hannah smiled at the woman. Jennifer, I'm so happy to introduce. Just, the woman said, with her fingers flying across the tiny keyboard, she said, holding up her finger. Second. The cell screen went black, and then she slipped it into her briefcase and smiled at Hannah and me. She extended her hand to me and gave me what might have been the most firm handshake of my life. Jennifer Page, she said. And you must be Abigail? I nodded. Nice to meet you, Jennifer. Hannah turned to me. Jennifer is my boss, she explained. Boss while we're at work. Friend while on off hours, like now, Jennifer said, her smile genuine and sweet although her hand kept twitching toward her purse. Texting withdrawals? Abigail, Jennifer said to me, stuffing her hand into her pocket. I think this is absolutely wonderful what you've done here. Really, I have so much admiration for people who donate their time. I always mean to, but with my full-time career and full-time business during off hours. She reached into the front pocket of her purse and pulled out an envelope. This is the best I can do right now, a donation to rescue at the barn. That's very generous of you, I said, accepting the envelope and feeling touched at her declaration and donation. This will go to good use here. Thank you. You're welcome, she said, just as her cell phone buzzed in her purse. Hannah chuckled. "45 seconds off the phone," she said, playfully elbowing Jennifer. "A new record for you. You should take that as a huge compliment, Abigail." I grinned. "Important business?" "Maybe," Jennifer said, giving a shrug that I guessed was supposed to appear nonchalant. "Hopefully." "Don't be modest, Jennifer," Hannah said before turning to me. "Jennifer has a potential investor for her business." I smiled. "That's wonderful." Jennifer's fingers drummed on the side of her purse even though I could see how hard she was trying to stop them from doing so. Before I could say anything, my own phone buzzed in my purse and I dug it out amongst the lip glosses and hair clips and checked the screen to find a text from Cooper: "Don't eat cake without me. I'll be there shortly." I smiled at Jennifer. "Hey, I checked mine, it's only fair for you to check yours." Jennifer released a huge sigh of relief and fished her phone out of her purse as Hannah laughed. I winked at Hannah before saying a quick goodbye, sweeping Banana into my arms, and turning to run down the gravel path toward the country road at the bottom of the hill. Sneakers might have been a sensible idea. But sensible is not a word often found in my personal vocabulary. Plus, you can't wear sneakers with a beautiful new black dress with a bow across the waist, not even when it's accented with the finest dog hair in the state of California. Instead, I wore a pair of strappy heels and they were almost the death of me as I hurried to surprise Cooper. I was catching my breath against the sign to Reagan's farm as Cooper pulled up. I quickly adjusted the sheet I had thrown over the sign and smiled as he stopped. He rolled down the passenger side window and leaned over. "What are you doing down here?" he asked, pulling off his sunglasses. "Why aren't you up at the farm? You all right? Can you get out of your car and come here, please?" I asked. He glanced around him. "There's no parking here." I adjusted Banana in my arm and dismissed him with a wave. "You're on a country road. There's no one coming. Just put it in park and come here." He glanced around. "Abigail, it's illegal and unsafe for me to park here. Rules are rules." I rolled my eyes. "You can take the cop out of his uniform, but you can't take the uniform out of the cop." Then I realized he had to be joking with me. I pressed my hands together in prayer position. "Would you please break that very unimportant rule for just 2 minutes?" Cooper laughed, checked down the country road once more, and then switched off the ignition. He looked so good as he climbed out of his car, hair a little less perfect, shirt untucked, the hem of his jeans torn from where Banana scratched at them during movie night last week. Okay, he said, putting his hands into his pockets. "I'm here." "What's so important?" I smiled and pointed at the sign. "I need your help with this." He tilted his head. "You got a new sign for the farm?" "Yup." "Can you help me pull this sheet?" I watched as his forehead wrinkled in confusion. "I'm holding Banana." It was the first lame excuse that popped into my head as to why I couldn't simply pull the sheet off myself. Because he was the best man to ever walk the planet, Cooper stepped forward and pulled the sheet away from the sign. "There," he said, folding the sheet over and over neatly into a square. "Now can we go up too?" I watched Cooper's face the whole time and smiled when he finally noticed the new sign also had a new name. Reagan's Dog Rescue was no longer just rescue at the barn. I'd asked her 2 weeks earlier about the change and she'd agreed wholeheartedly. I watched as Cooper mouthed the new name, frozen where he stood. He turned to me. "Rescue at the barn and Harrison's house?" I nodded. "There's a section of the house now dedicated solely to puppies." "You added Harrison's name?" he asked, seeming barely able to get out the words. "I figured the donation was made in his honor, so, oof." I yelped in surprise when Cooper pulled me into his arms and lifted me off the ground, with Banana between us. "You have no idea how much this means to me," he whispered, squeezing tighter. When he pulled back, I noticed the hint of tears in his eyes. I pressed my hand to his cheek and smiled. Then, because I didn't want to cry before the party, I nudged him toward his car. "Hey, who said you could illegally park here, Officer Hill?" He laughed and shook his head. "Don't make me report you to the police," I added, winking at him. He held open my door and stopped me before I got in to give me a quick kiss. "Thank you," he said. "No," I said, shaking my head. "Thank you." The grand opening of Harrison's house was a massive success. With Cooper's help, we were able to make it into more than just a dog rescue. Now that there was no rent to pay each month, Reagan had funds to partner with Founding Friendships to offer part-time jobs to the homeless to come and work with the animals on Reagan's farm. Donations flooded in that morning, and more dogs were adopted in those few hours than had been in the past few months, including one special poodle mix now named Atticus, who was adopted by Courtney Carmichael. As the crowd started to thin out, I searched for where Cooper had disappeared to and found him with Reagan signing paperwork that looked very similar to the paperwork I signed to adopt Banana. Could this guy get any more perfect? Happy sigh. "Abigail," Cooper said as he saw me hurrying toward him. "I want to introduce you to someone." I wrapped my hands around his arm and squealed. We stood outside the pen where the dogs played while he pointed. "Meet Fido." I searched through the dogs. It looked like he was pointing to this fuzzy guy in the corner. "You mean the terrier mix?" I asked. "No, Abigail," Cooper said, laughing as he gestured to the opposite corner. "The big one there. The big one is coming home with me. A black lab mix, who is hyper and huge." "Are you crazy?" I threw my hands up into the air as I turned to face him. "He'll eat Banana alive. He'll squash him under one of those massive paws and we'll have nothing left of Banana but a pancake." "Oh, banana pancakes sound so good right now. Do you want to go get some banana pancakes after this?" "Abigail." "No, you're right that I'm getting distracted," I said, shaking my head and jabbing my finger repeatedly against my forehead. "Focus, Abigail. That's not the point. The point is that there is no way at all our pooches are going to get along, Cooper. No way at all. One wag of Fido's tail and Banana's going to go flying. Abigail. A single bark is going to blast poor little Banana's poor little ears. Abigail. What if your puppy sits on Banana?" I asked, my voice was rising higher and higher. "What if your puppy rolls over on Banana? What if?" He suddenly put an arm around my shoulder, whirled me around, and then pointed to the corner of the pen. "Abigail, look," he whispered calmly in my ear. "Would you be quiet for 2 seconds and look?" I turned back to the pen and found the big dog, Cooper's dog, Fido, nuzzling Banana. And he was nothing less than the gentlest giant with my tiny man. "Guess what?" Cooper whispered in my ear. "Sometimes opposites attract." I shifted so we were face to face. "They sure do. Guess what else?" He ran his thumb across my cheek and then leaned in close, gazing at me with those beautiful blue eyes. "Sometimes opposites fall deeply and madly and crazily in love. I love you, too." I smiled, went up on my tippy toes, and pressed my lips to his. So many emotions rolled through me as we kissed that I didn't know which to choose, so I felt them all at once fully, deeply, passionately, and with my whole heart. The end. If you enjoyed spending time with these characters, be sure to listen to Jennifer's story in the Double Date Disaster, Do-Over Date series, Book 2. You have been listening to Million Dollar Date, Do-Over Date Series, Book 1, by Susan Hatler, copyright 2019 by Susan Hatler, audiobook copyright 2023 by Susan Hatler. Susan Hatler is a New York Times and USA Today best-selling author who writes humorous and emotional women's fiction and young adult novels. Many of Susan's books have been translated into German, Spanish, French, and Italian. A natural optimist, she believes life is amazing, people are fascinating, and imagination is endless. She loves spending time with her characters and hopes you do, too.